Everybody, we'll get started. We apologize for the delay. We've had some technical difficulties, but this is the Provo Municipal Council meeting work session. It is Tuesday, August 9th, 2022. It is 12:41 p.m. Meetings of the Municipal Council are being held in hybrid fashion. That is, members of the public can continue to view council meetings on YouTube or Facebook, or they may attend in person. I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up. My name is George Hanley. I'm Vice Chair. Our Chair, Travis Hoppen, is excused today, although he'll be joining us shortly online. I'm joined on the stand by Catrice McKay, Rachel Whipple, and Dave Shipley, and we expect our other counselors to join us shortly. We're also joined by our Chief Administrative Officer, Wayne Parker, Brian Jones, our City Attorney, and Karen Tapahi, whose title I'm not sure what it is at this point, but she's our honorary member. I don't know what to call it. Okay. So the opening prayer will be given by Malia Daly or Elizabeth Vanderwerken. Oh, there we go.
Our kind Heavenly Father, we're grateful that we can gather today as the City Council and City staff, and ask that we might have Thy Spirit with us as the council members deliberate the issues before them today. We are grateful to live in this beautiful city and for the many opportunities that it affords us. And we say these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Elizabeth. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called on by the chair. I'll just mention today is a very full agenda. So we need to try to remain focused as a council, and I will try to remind presenters of our time constraints as we move forward. It is proposed that we approve the following minutes: July 12th, 2022 council meeting. Are there any objections or requested changes? Seeing none, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Our first item is a request for approval of a general plan map amendment to Appendix C6 in relation to adjustments of development standards in the SDP 5 zone, which is Villages at Celebration Specific Development Plan Overlay. Lakewood North Neighborhood, and Aaron Ardmore is our presenter. And sorry, there are two items bundled together. The second one is a request for approval of Ordinance Text Amendments to Chapter 14.49E City Code to adjust development standards in the SDP 5 zone and to amend the related development agreement. So Aaron, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So these are tied together. The text amendment essentially is forcing the map to change, which is a needed change anyway. So the owners of this area, the Broadview Shore Ivory Home development team, they've moved from this concept that was approved back in 2008 to this. There's a kind of an overall effort to update the zoning code, to modernize it, to give them a little bit more freedom, to essentially adjust to changes that have happened on the ground with the school sites, the road network, the market conditions, and also to try to concentrate housing units towards that Village 7 so they can make some commercial viability there for the economic development growth of Provo City. I'll go into kind of a more in-depth presentation tonight, but I just wanted to come here and see if you had any questions for me with the proposals, whether it's the map, the text amendment, or the update to the development agreement.
Thank you. Any questions for Aaron? Go ahead, Mr. Shipley.
Yeah, just how many additional units does it mean? How many more doors does it mean than what was originally approved?
So no additional units, just kind of a shifting
Shuffling.
of them, yeah, right? So they're allowed a certain number of units out there, about 1,600 equivalent residential units, based on what was agreed upon with the sewer demand back in the original approvals. So they're really just shifting where those units are and where they're concentrated at. Most of Village 1 is built out, half of Village 2 is built out. So you'll see a lot of the growth and changes in the future villages 4 and 6 typically.
Was there a commercial element with the original?
Yeah, if you look over on Village 5, if we can go back to the previous map, the commercial is all that pink. So it was concentrated earlier. The idea was to concentrate on Geneva Road before the full vision of Lakeview Parkway was adopted and is now being built. So transferring that commercial over to the major corridor of Lakeview Parkway, where that's going to be the major arterial, made more sense for.
Can you show us where it is on the other map?
Yes. So just a pointer. All right. So Village 7 is the commercial corridor now. So it moved from against Geneva to against Lakeview Parkway. And that's why you'll see most of the density concentrated in Village 6 and 4 to kind of help the viability of that commercial to happen.
Go ahead. Did you have more questions?
Okay, so there's no more doors. You said 1,600 was original, and
Right.
where is that? Because like when I read through it, it seemed like it was very vague as far as you could have these kind of units to this number of units, which would be different numbers. I just didn't see anything specific like that.
Yeah, so what really caps them is this general plan appendix C6, and then the original development agreement is what really caps the units. The zone code for the SDP 5 offers a range of densities per village, but they wouldn't be able to maximize over
They can't do more than 1,600
Right.
doors. Now, how does that fit into the idea of 4 units per acre on the west side? Like how many units per acre is it considering all of this?
Sure. So you've got to remember these were all approved prior to that general plan policy. So that doesn't,
Do we know what it works out to about?
I haven't done the math. I can have that for you tonight though.
Okay, that'd be great. My other question was, I've had a few emails saying that they didn't have a neighborhood meeting about this change. Just wondering if that did happen or.
So if I recall, the applicant can confirm this tonight. If I recall right, the Brad Mackey, who's representing this team, reached out, but didn't receive a response.
Okay.
We've been working through this in Planning Commission for several months and just hasn't received a response through any of it.
Okay. My other question was, on some of these villages, we're combining types of units, right? We're combining some like single family townhomes and apartments.
Mhm.
And I'm curious about homeowner association stuff. I see I was all in an HOA. I assume, so I just want this clarified. I've been in charge of an HOA and I'm wondering that, the single family homes will not be, paying or their HOA won't be combined with like apartment units where they have to, replace the roof or do all landscaping. And I just wonder if there's been thought about that those things are going to be separated.
Yeah, and while the granularity of housing types is appreciated, that is going to take some work to manage out how the HOA deals with all that. We don't, as planning staff, to get into that
Will
part
Brad
of it,
be
but
here tonight?
Brad should be here tonight to
Okay.
ask those questions too.
2 more questions.
Yeah,
Parking. I understand there was no reduction in parking. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yeah, so earlier proposal had a reduction in parking, and
Good.
we fought against that, and it's now just referencing our parking code.
Great. Thank you. That's it. Only
Okay.
one more question. Done.
Okay, we'll have time to ask more questions tonight, but we should probably move on. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay. We'll move on to item number 3, which is still Aaron. Request for approval of a zone map amendment from the residential conservation zone to the lower density residential LDR zone to build a new one-family dwelling in an accessory apartment located at 769 West, 200 North, Dixon.
Okay, so this one is as infill development, trying to use the LDR zone to make use of a deep lot in the Dixon neighborhood. There is a development agreement tied to this one to kind of lock that concept in to make staff feel comfortable with recommending approval. But again, if you have any questions, I can try to prepare for those tonight.
Any questions for, that would be helpful for tonight? Maybe that's probably okay, I guess we'll revisit it tonight. Thanks.
Fair enough. Thank you.
All right, item number 4 is a presentation on a study of the potential use of alternative fuel source vehicles in Provo City's fleet. This will be presented by Mark Io, council intern. Thanks, Mark.
Well, greetings to the council, the administration. My purpose for today is just to present an analysis of the comparison of our vehicles, gas, hybrid, and electric. Did this in collaboration with Mr. Merritt, Warren Merritt, our fleet manager, and also introduce a type of vehicle that is getting more and more famous because of its environmental benefits, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So, oh, sorry.
Oh, while you're doing that, let me just make mention of the fact that Bill Fillmore and Travis Hoban are online and have joined us. I apologize. I think they were on for earlier. I didn't see them.
Got it. Just a quick agenda. Just want to introduce the purpose, the different metrics we use to analyze different type of vehicle, direct cost and indirect cost, the limitations of the studies. Spoiler alert, it's hard to compare apples to apples using vehicles because there's a lot of factors we need to consider. Findings, rankings using this analysis that we used, and appendix that includes some of the tables that is very helpful for the council and for the administration. By the way, I just used an agenda. BYU MPA professors are so proud of me right now. So just to briefly introduce this, again, our purpose is to determine the best type of vehicle for cost, long-term use, and environmental benefits using different metrics that we categorize as direct and indirect cost. That is a study for our literature review that we did. A group of engineers doing studies on different type of vehicles. So we use their study a lot for this research, but I'll be comparing gas, hybrid, and electric, and we'll be introducing hydrogen fuel cell. So what's under direct cost? When we talk about direct cost, we are talking about retail cost, the price that the state contractor charges, maintenance costs per 5 years, the cost needs to keep, and so for this research, I'll be using F-150. So F-150, which compose 10% of our fleet right now. So for the retail costs, I'll be using F-150. Maintenance costs for 5 years, I'll be again using an F-150. The cost we need to maintain an F-150 in running order, fueling costs, how much is it to refuel or recharge an F-150, the total cost of life, the total of those first 3 bullet points, the life of a vehicle, the average life expectancy of a vehicle, and miles per gallon. So these are all under direct cost. So yep, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hands. But again, for indirect cost, so what will I be considering when I talk about indirect cost? I'll be talking about fueling and charging time per mile. This is the amount of time to charge a vehicle, maximum number of miles with full tank or full charge. Greenhouse gas emission, that's our focus. That's one of the main focus that was given to me when doing this study. Find the one that will give us the most environmental benefits.
I did have a question about the time costs.
Yes.
Because, and by the way, thank you for putting this together. It's extremely helpful. I didn't understand why we needed to estimate hourly wage loss for an electric vehicle that presumably is charging at night. It's going to be fully charged in the morning, go out and do all the battery should last for the whole day and then it would come back. So it seems to me that indirect cost would be 0, wouldn't it?
So this time cost, again, this is part of the lit review that I did. This is one of the factors that they considered under indirect cost, mentioning that study that I did. It's one of those factors, but I put it as last because again, I don't see it very helpful, but just in case we want to know how much is it, like how much time or how much money are we spending for charging and maintenance. So just in case, I just put it in there for time cost.
Councillor Ellsworth has joined us. Thank you.
Again, I used F-150s, 10% of our fleet are F-150s. I just want to start with limitations. So I was talking to Warren, he emphasized this, that it's hard to compare apples to apples, several factors to consider when comparing this different type of vehicles, technologies, batteries, types of fuel, and just like what you mentioned, Chair Hanley, it's really hard to compare different types of vehicles that is using a fuel compared to the one that we are charging for like 9 hours. So, but we did our best to compare this types of vehicles. So now what's our finding for the retail cost? This is data from our fleet management team. Gas would still be the cheapest, $36,216 for a gas F-150. An electric F-150 would be the most expensive. Findings for average car maintenance cost for 5 years, our most expensive would be gas for $8,168. And hybrid F-150 would cost $4,737 to maintain for 5 years.
I had a question about that, actually. Electric F-150s are pretty new, right? So how do we know what the maintenance cost is going to be over 5 years? Have they even been around for 5 years?
This is a data I got from Warren. Do you want to help me with
I
this?
thought they were kind of,
You are correct.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
I usually have a pretty loud voice.
yeah.
You are correct. They have not been around that long. Hence, these are estimates. We did a lot of research online for how long they have been around, which has only been about 6 months, depending on where you are in the country. And so a lot of this is very raw data. We took what we could and we multiplied it as such for a 5-year average.
Okay.
So you are correct. It is a little raw, but with it being as new of a vehicle as it is, the technologies, we worked with what we had.
Okay, thank you.
Next one is fueling and charging cost. Gas would be the most expensive. For 5 years, electric would be the cheapest. Total cost of life per unit, which is the total of the retail cost, the maintenance cost, and the fueling cost. Gas would be cheapest, and electric would be the most expensive. A huge portion, a huge chunk of that price would come from its retail cost. When it comes to average life of vehicles, for gas F-150, this is the average again. However, I was given a data that for a half-ton truck, our average is not 150 to 300,000, but it's only 6,226 miles per year. And we have an average life expectancy of 9 to 11 years, depending on duty cycle or how it was being used. But just for the general average, for all F-150s, Provo, outside Provo, the average is 150 to 300,000 miles, which could go up to 20 years with perfect maintenance and perfect everything. Hybrid, 80,000 to 100,000 miles, 7 years before the first battery replacement. When we're talking about electric and hybrid vehicle, their average life is mostly measured according to battery life replacement. So again, it's hard to compare apples to apples. For miles per gallon, an electric vehicle would have the most miles per gallon equivalents of 6 to 8 mpge. For gas, we have 20 miles per gallon if we're just driving in a city, and 26 miles per gallon if it's being used in a highway, which has the least mpg compared to all this. Fueling and charging time per mile, I just took it just in case we need this data. For gas F-150, it takes 6 minutes to charge. That could go up to 621 miles. For a hybrid F-150, 15 minutes to charge in total. It could go up to 750 miles. And for an electric 150, this depends on the level of charger. We have level 1 charger, level 2 charger. The higher the level, the fastest it charges. It could go from 44 minutes to 19 hours, but could go up to 320 miles. For our greenhouse gas emission, for our gas F-150, driving it could produce 441 grams per mile of carbon dioxide. Hybrid F-150 will produce 350 grams per mile of carbon dioxide, and electric F-150 would produce 235 grams per mile of carbon dioxide. And most of this carbon emission would come from charging it. Time cost, how much salary per hour during the day we're paying for maintenance and charging. For gas, $2,500. For electric, $5,845.62, just the most expensive. Again, considering charging something for 19 hours during the day. So that could be a bias or a limitation of this study.
Do we know how many level 2 chargers we have that would be available in the city? 2 city vehicles?
I have a data here for my appendix of the number of chargers we have. So currently Provo has 19 charging stations. Provo has 19 charging stations with 37 chargers. Wow, I will look that out for you. Like what level of chargers do
I'm
we have?
assuming
recently?
all of those are at least level 2. Correct. Yeah. I mean, level 1 is plugging it into your wall at home.
They should
which
be.
is
I'm not
not
sure,
what
but
Anyone's going to do.
Yeah, so level 1 is your standard 120 volt wall charger. Level 2, is the 240 volt. So similar to your dryer, they plug in at home, and those can vary a bit. You can get them up to a higher voltage, which can drastically change the time that you can charge a vehicle on a level 2. There is some drastic changes there depending on how that level 3 is DC. That's really high voltage. And those are, Tesla has those. We have none. I don't believe there's any level 3s in Utah.
But if we owned a fleet of electric vehicles as a city, would we have access? Would we need to, I guess I'm just wondering about infrastructure. Do we need to build charging stations at city facilities to make this work?
Most
properly,
likely,
right?
yes. We do have some, like at Public Works, there's a few that are out in front that are available for public use. Most of the ones that I do know are just out for general public use and available for those. I don't believe, and there may be some at Energy that are specific for city use only, but from recollection, I don't believe there's very many. Most of those are all public use.
All right. Thanks.
okay. Again, going back for time costs, again, electric would be the most expensive. So why consider this hydrogen fuel cell vehicles? State incentives. The Utah Conversion of Alternate Fuel Grant Program provides grants to businesses and government entities that purchase clean vehicles or install conversion equipment on eligible vehicles that allows the vehicle to operate on alternative fuels or reduces a vehicle emission of regulated pollutants. I have more information in that website. It's in the memo. But yeah, it's getting more and more famous for its environmental benefits. However,
Sorry, I've got so many questions. So there's now a $7,500 rebate to anyone who buys an electric vehicle. Does that not apply to cities or to like a corporate purchase? Do you know anything about that?
I will research that for you. Yep. But most of the information, it's in that website. I can dig deeper about this grant,
It's
but
like maybe Shane has something to say about that.
As far as I understand, all of our vehicles that we purchase are on state contract, and that does not come with incentives. A lot of the incentives are per manufacturer. So once a manufacturer hits a certain number of vehicles, that tax credit goes away. So there are certain manufacturers that you cannot get a tax credit for those because they've sold so many vehicles, they're beyond that tax credit limit. So, but as far as I understand, we're on state contract. No, we do not get that incentive for purchasing electric vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
but for this hydrogen fuel vehicles, we only have very limited models. We only have a Toyota Mirai and a Hyundai Nexo, which is an SUV. Toyota is the car purchased by Long Beach, one of the pioneers of this hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So this is just some information about hydrogen fuel cells. It would cost from $49,500 to $59,435. Maintenance would cost from $2,234 and above. Fueling for 5 years, $3,500. Total cost of life in 5 years, $60,202. Its life could go up to 11 years in average. Miles per gallon, 57 to 74 mpge. For its indirect costs, this is what it's mostly known for. Charging it for 4 minutes could go up to 400 miles. 0 carbon gas emission per mile. And the time cost for charging it, because you only charge it for 4 minutes, it's $1,414.77. But the problem is there's not a lot of hydrogen fuel cell charging stations in the country. most of it in California and Hawaii. Aloha. So, but this is for the future. When it comes to retail costs, including hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, of course, this will become the most expensive according to Kelley Blue Book. Average car maintenance for 5 years, hydrogen fuel vehicle would be the cheapest. Fueling and charging, electric would still be the cheapest. This includes the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Total cost of life per unit, hydrogen would be the most expensive. A big chunk of its price will come from its retail cost. Average life of vehicle, gas F-150 would be the most visible for the city, which gives the most miles per year. Miles per gallon, of course, a hydrogen vehicle, 57 to 74 mpge. Fueling and charging times. It's really hard to make comparisons here because, again, it depends on the level of charging station, but most of our charging stations are level 2 chargers. Greenhouse gas emission. Of course, hydrogen would produce none. Time cost or lifespan. Most expensive would be an electric F-150. So in rankings, in summary, considering all those direct costs and indirect costs, using a basic standard scoring method, the best among these three would still be gas, followed by electric, followed by hybrid. When it comes to indirect cost, when it comes to fueling time, miles per tank, the amount of carbon dioxide it produces in time cost, the first would be gas still, followed by electric and hybrid. And these are just additional data that could potentially help us in our further research. Orem, when it comes to their F-150s, they have 28 F-150s. Salt Lake has 21 F-150s, gas vehicles. West Jordan has 119 gas vehicle F-150. Orem has 0 hybrid F-150, but they have 1 total hybrid Escape. Salt Lake has 2 hybrid F-150, but they have 274 total hybrids, mostly Ford Responder. West Jordan has 0 hybrid F-150, but they have 4 total hybrid Escape. Orem has 0 electric vehicles. Salt Lake has 0 F-150 electric vehicles, but they have 38 total Chevrolet Bolt. West Jordan has 0 F-150 electric vehicle, but they have 1 Chevrolet Bolt. Of course, none of us have hydrogen fuel cell vehicles at the moment. When it comes to the number of charging stations, we have 4 electric vehicle charging stations in Orem, 332 in Salt Lake. We have 2 in West Jordan, and they have 1 fast charger. So currently Provo has 19 charging stations with 37 chargers. That's the end of it. Any
questions for Mark?
questions?
Yeah, so Ford just increased their prices as of today, I think effective today by like $7,500 for the base F-150, which is considered their fleet model. But then the new legislation extends credits beyond that limitation that we were just talking about that they phase out. So I don't know exactly what that rule means, but I am interested. It looks like, just in a little bit of research that I've done, that other cities have conglomerates or associations that help them accomplish those credits, even though they're not taxable entities, right? It doesn't help us to get a tax credit as a city, but they somehow transfer those or commoditize those and get some kind of benefit from that. So I think that's worth considering or looking at. If the total cost of life, if we agree with these numbers, is a difference of $5,000 or $6,000 between the electric and the gas, then if we could accomplish most of that $7,500 credit, it might make them competitive. Also, do you feel like there's any limitations based on the study coming from 2017 on the efficiency of these different types of, I guess in what I've read over the last 5 years, we've come a long ways with battery technology and with electric vehicles in general, but is there newer information that could help us understand length of life, maintenance, those kinds of things?
I could get more research, but most of this data that I got, this is the most updated one available online from their Ford website and whichever I could find. But I can dig deeper if you want me to. Yeah, but these are, as far as I know, the most updated numbers that we could get.
Okay, thank you. I would be interested in how cities, how fleets, how nonprofits, government entities somehow get access to that credit. I know it's indirect, but there's got to be ways that they've figured that out. There are other fleets that have been able to figure that out, and associations in different states that do that. So, thank you.
I could research that.
Councilor Ellsworth.
I apologize, I'm a little late. Did this item come from a committee or from staff?
This came as a request during a work session.
Oh, okay, gotcha, thanks.
Councilor Whipple.
So when you were looking at the cost of the entire thing, did you include the cost of battery replacement?
Yeah, we included that in the maintenance costs,
Okay,
battery replacement.
because it looked like for the length of time we expect to use the vehicles, there would have to be at least one battery replacement for both the hybrid and the electric.
For electric, a battery could go up to 5 to 7 years. 5 to 7 years according to the average. But yeah, I can get more data on that when it comes to battery
I
replacement.
just wanted to know if that was included. So when you were saying, it was a slide back a few where you had the greenhouse emissions and the fueling time. Yeah, this one. Oh, indirect cost. So I don't know that these are necessarily weighted.
Yeah, we don't have a specific weight on this criteria.
Right,
That's why.
so to get because greenhouse gas emissions, it's not just the total emissions, it's how many are actually emitted right here in our little
Yeah.
bowl of a valley that affect our air quality. And my understanding is that electric ones, those emissions are probably somewhere else instead of right here, so they don't have the same effect on our immediate air quality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is just a basic scoring method. Like first place, you get 5 points. Second place, you get 3 points. But yeah, it depends on our priority. If our priority is to be environmental friendly, of course, we could give a greater weight on that criteria.
Yeah, well, and on that, it's not necessarily the environmental thing, but the health effects that we have on our people here and the workers who are with the vehicles. Now, I recall when we were talking about this earlier on budget, we found out that the city did have some electric or hybrid ones, I think, for parking enforcement, and it turned out to not be a good thing because they just drained the battery too fast because of the way they used it. So did you look into how the different departments would be using the vehicle for how appropriate the different type of vehicle would be?
I haven't researched that. I can research that. if
Because
you-
I think they were surprised that it didn't work for parking enforcement, but it was really good to know.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Warren. Okay. Yeah, I can do further research on that and just collaborate with them.
Okay, we're out of time on this item, but I do think it might be helpful to sort of figure out what's next. And just by way of context, I think it was the previous council that passed a resolution to encourage the city to buy hybrid and or electric vehicles whenever feasible. That was sort of a generic guideline. And then this came up sort of in discussion, I think, when you had presented last to us about what would be the ways of measuring the cost of this. So I guess it sounds to me like there's probably some opportunities right around the corner for federal funding on this. And our public works people are so good at finding money. It might be a good opportunity for us, because if there are serious infrastructure solutions to say, this would be quite feasible for us if we could have 6 power level 2 chargers in the building, in the garage at these locations, and we know and we could get some grants for something like that, then it seems like we've got a lot more momentum to move toward electric whenever possible. So I don't know. We have a natural resources committee that this kind of came up generically at the dais. So I don't know maybe we'll just follow up with our staff and with you guys and see where we can go from here. I just would like to be able to continue to solve whatever, remove any obstacles there may be to moving in this direction. So thanks.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. Mr. Fillmore, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't.
Yes, thank you, George. Like some of you, I'm a bit surprised by some of these findings or rankings. And I'm wondering if, in addition to getting a better handle on rebates and government funding and subsidies and whatever to help us address this more precisely, I'm wondering about the long-term feasibility of taking a harder look at hydrogen. I just don't have any idea. I mean, the advantages look pretty substantial. I'd hate to invest a ton of money in electric vehicles and then be able to get hydrogen that apparently is going to perform much better in several indices. Can we get a handle on when the hydrogen vehicles might be more than a dream and a reality and their accessibility on the market?
Currently, we have very limited models of hydrogen fuel vehicle, but I'm optimistic about the future. We're gonna get more, and I'm willing to do more research on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not trying to hold anybody to any deadline or anything, but I'm curious. Are we looking at these hydrogen vehicles being available in 2 years or 5 or 10?
I think that's something we can find out.
Yeah, I'll work on that. Yeah,
And pricing for the charger. for that.
pricing. Okay,
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. We'll move on then to item number 5, presentation regarding Safe Streets for All grant opportunity, background and discussion. This is Rob Hunter, Assistant City Engineer, who will be our presenter, or it looks like Dave Decker. We'll start. We have 55 minutes for this item.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hanley, Council, I asked if I could take just a couple of minutes at the beginning of this presentation and to clarify some intentions and bring this item to the council. I think there was an email that was sent out with some general information about a grant opportunity with a safety action plan associated with it. And as you see the presentation in just a minute from Rob Hunter, there's some very specific qualifications for this grant application and needed council action that needs to happen relatively quickly. He's going to present a timeline, and you might be a bit surprised by the timeline. But I think the biggest concern that I had as Director in Public Works, I wanted to make sure that the council understands as we refer both internally with the staff and our consultant, we're going to be referring to the Transportation Master Plan. And our intent is not to have a full-blown debate about the Transportation Master Plan. You may remember the Transportation Master Plan, and rightfully so, should take quite a bit of time. There's many different components of a Transportation Master Plan. But this grant application is very, very focused. And as Rob and Gordon have the conversation over the next couple of council meetings, they may steer you from time to time kind of back into might feel a little bit confining corridor. And I apologize for using that word, but you might feel a little bit guided from time to time about the process, and it's intentionally so. Again, the timeline and the nature of the grant is pretty focused, and our intent is to have some debate relative to the grant application and the qualifications of the grant, but not to have a wide open debate about the Transportation Master Plan. So I wanted to kind of preempt the conversation with that intent here, and then turn the time over to Rob for some details. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dave. So as Dave said, we're the Safe Streets for All is a grant program that probably has the fastest and tightest timeframe out of the grants that are coming out of the overall bipartisan infrastructure law. And so what I'm going to be going over today is just to give you an overview of the grant, the timeline of how we got to where I'm making this presentation today, the timeline that we, to make this work the way that we are proposing, the timeline that we need to have with you as the council. And then you can ask, obviously, being the council, questions anytime that you want, but I thought that there would be a good moment to pause and have a larger discussion if you need. And then I'll go on to elements that'll be part of this safety action plan that Dave was talking about, a Vision Zero statement that's part of the requirements for this, the types of projects that are associated with this grant funding source, and then kind of go through some final questions. And I will also preview this to say, my presentation is not going to be 55 minutes long. It is, I wanted to make sure that you had plenty of time to where you could ask questions, discuss things. So depending on your questions, it could be, could be 55 minutes, or if you don't have too many questions, then it may be 20 minutes. So I just wanted to make sure that y'all had plenty of time to ask questions, because we are talking about a fast timeline. So the overview of the grant is that this grant program is $5 billion over 5 years. So it is specifically written out to be $1 billion per year over the next 5 years. Any funding that we go after will require a 20% local match. Funds are in this particular, in the Safe Streets for All program, grant funding program, is only available to regional and local government. So we're talking not state. So it could be county, it could be a city, it could be an MPO, but the state can't go after the grant money. And then the funds are, as it says in the name, are specifically for street safety projects. So it's split into two. There are planning grants to go after safety action plans or to prepare safety action plans. And then there's also implementation grant funds, which are for actual projects. And if we go after project funding, which is what we're proposing to do, we can't go after planning funding. So we'll talk about why we got here. We are moving forward with a safety action plan to prepare it before the September 15th deadline. And we'll talk about why we think this was a good idea and the steps that we've already taken to go in that direction. So we have to have a safety action plan adopted by the elected board, by y'all, before we can apply for the project grants. And then project funding, we could be going after anywhere from $5 million. That's the minimum threshold, up to $30 million. So with that 20% funding, we'd be looking for 1.2 and above to add on to that. So we're talking about total $6.2 million projects and above. So one important note is that we have hired parametrics who did our transportation master plan, which has a safety chapter as part of that transportation master plan to do the safety action plan for us, and also to help us prepare the grant applications for the project funding before the September 15th deadline. And then another important note is that this is a separate document from the transportation master plan. So it's not supposed to be the same document. So how we got here is May 16th was when the FHWA and USDOT sent out the notice of funding opportunity, but being a new grant funding, there wasn't all the information wasn't out at the same time, and being a new grant funding source, there's enough information to where you can digest it all in one day, right? There's a lot of information. And so it wasn't until almost a month later that they put together some webinars to really go over the grant. And even that was split out into 3 separate ones. So they had one for a general overview of the grant, and then one specifically for the safety action plan, our planning side of things, and then another one for the implementation of project grants. And so after we kind of got a hold on what all is does this plan or this grant funding source, what is it about? We began discussions. Well, we began discussions beforehand, but we really got enough information to really have some more serious discussions. And so we talked with the Mountain Line Association of Governments and internally about the potential of either teaming up with them or going out on our own for safety action plans. That seemed to be the way that the agreement or the thought was that's where everybody's going to be going. And so that's where our initial discussions began. was talking about either a joint or a separate safety action plan. But then maybe even early July, but especially as we got into mid-July, we started to explore with parametrics. And this was with some, I don't know, urging, but at least some information that we got from UDOT saying that there were larger communities, they knew of other larger communities that were going after or preparing a safety action plan independently so that they could have it done by the September 15th deadline so that they could go after project funding. And the reason for that, and the reason why we've decided to do the same thing, is that puts us a year ahead of where almost everybody else in the nation will be. With $1 billion a year, we believe that the federal government, that the DOT is going to want to show that they actually got projects built with even this first round of funding. And so we'd like to be part of that chunk of money going towards actual projects. So this puts us a year ahead of where most everybody else will be. Again, even as at $1 billion a year, if you look even at the bottom threshold of $5 million per project, even if everybody was just going after the minimum, that's 200 projects nationwide. There's a lot of communities within the United States. So the competition is going to be a lot more fierce in year two than it is in this year. And the other thing too is that already having addressed safety as part of the transportation master plan, it wasn't like we were starting from scratch. And especially where we're going with parametrics, they were the ones that helped prepare that. They looked at safety analyses. They've got the backup data. We can add to that backup data and kind of hit the ground running a little bit more than if we were starting from scratch. So on July 27th, we signed an agreement with parametrics. We used our engineering miscellaneous funds to cover that. And they've started doing the initial analysis to do the safety action plan. So just kind of put this in an overall perspective, even on August 1st, the beginning of this month, the DOT released an amended notice of funding opportunity. So, again, they came out with the initial in May 16th, but really as soon as we knew enough to really make a decision of how to go, we made that decision and we've been moving forward. And then just to emphasize again, this is all to be prepared to put in for project funding on September 15th. That's the deadline. To go over what we are proposing for the council timeline then is that today I'm making this kind of introduction and telling you about what the plan is, what we've been doing moving forward. Our next step would be to present to the Transportation Mobility and Advisory Council at their August 18th meeting. Then we would come back here on August 23rd and provide an update. And again, take any questions, address any questions or comments or direction that we have from you on August 23rd. And then we would come back 2 weeks after that to we can come back to both the work session if we feel like, there's some information that you need before passing the resolution. But what we would request is we'd be coming in with a resolution for you to pass on September 6th to adopt the safety action plan and a Vision Zero statement at that council meeting. And then again, that's so that we can have everything prepared to submit before September 15th. And an important note on that, then what we're going to be bringing to you as projects, I guess our prioritization off that will be in terms of the projects that we will take to this funding source, I guess, to apply for grants this year, will be the ones that we feel like are most best match the priorities that are outlined in this grant funding. So at this point, any initial questions?
Councilor Ellsworth.
We don't currently have a safety action plan, right?
We do not.
And I haven't read the transportation master plan recently. Is there a chapter on safety or section on safety? What's it like?
There's a chapter on safety. Yeah. That identifies, I think, 4 projects that are specifically for safety, not with anything else.
Okay, cool. And then are we going to use this safety action plan beyond this grant application, or are we just doing it specifically for this?
No, the plan would be to keep the safety action plan. So our proposal would be to add it as an appendix to the transportation master plan.
And continue implementing it beyond this grant.
Correct. That is part of the requirements, is that you, and we'll go into that, but the safety action plan identifies policies, you're supposed to identify policies, timelines, projects, to carry out. And that's part of that Vision Zero to have target dates and targets of how much you want to reduce fatal and serious crashes. So yeah, it's not a one-time thing.
Okay, cool.
Councilor Fillmore has a question.
Thank you, Chair Hadley. Rob, I'm not trying to pin you down on this because I know you've got some meetings to have and discussions to hold, but can you give us a rough sense of what projects you might have in mind for the application of these funds?
So previously, two corridors that come to mind so in the Transportation Master Plan, parametrics have looked through the 2016 to 2018 crash data, and we're going to update that with 2019 to 2021 data. But it seems like in both the two corridors that show up on both are Freedom and 900 East, and so we still need to define as we continue to do analyses and really figure out delve into the causes of each one of these accidents. My anticipation is that we may be looking at new signals, signal improvements, enhanced pedestrian crossings with, for example, the overhead crossings like we've got on next to Pioneer Park. So like I said, I don't know exactly which projects we're going to be going at for sure, but I know that the 900 East corridor and the 200 West or Freedom corridor were two that came up as corridors with higher serious crashes on them. So we'd be looking to do something on those two corridors.
Okay, that makes sense. I wonder if these funds under the rubric of safe streets might also find some application to what we're planning on doing to West Center Street downtown, as we slow down traffic to make things safer and even possibly reroute traffic to 100 North.
So in terms of the overall plan or the overall types of projects that this grant application addresses, that would fit on there. I think that where we may have difficulty, not to say that we can't go after, I guess try for the grant funding to use it for projects like that, but we don't have, that's not one of our higher crash rate corridors. And it seems to me that that's what the grant is specifically looking for is looking for, solutions, long-term solutions that address all, safety for all users, but in areas specifically that have higher crash rates within the community. So again, I don't know until we complete that analysis. I can't say for sure, but that didn't come up as we were initially looking at it. That didn't come up as one of the high crash rate corridors.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor McKay.
You might have just answered this, but I am wondering, especially with our discussion coming up about ARPA funds, but will this safety involve sidewalks at all, especially around schools or that? So there would be a use for these funds towards sidewalks?
Yeah, that is one of the specific things that they call out as these funds can be used for.
And is it required to meet that threshold of accidents or something like you mentioned, or is it just making sure that they're there?
It requires doing an analysis and identifying where your crash data is showing that you have a safety problem. And so if we identify, 3 or 4 corridors as having a higher safety problem, and we address totally different places, I don't feel that will have as good a chance of getting those projects funded if we're not focused on the corridors that show that have a safety problem.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the new elementary, Wasatch Elementary, which
Yep,
I know you're aware of. Like that, there's probably no data there, right? To say, oh, this is a dangerous place for kids to walk because they haven't been walking there.
Correct. Yeah.
But we know there's some risks. But you're saying if the grant money goes primarily after the targeted areas, there still could be some other funding to address problems like that are kind of emerging.
So it talked about looking for corridors or looking at neighborhoods that need problems addressed. And so we're going to be looking through all the data. Our consultants have been going to the webinars where they're getting feedback from the people who will be looking at these applications. And so really what what we feel like we need to do is really look at what it is that they feel like they want to fund and find where in Provo we can do those. Because, safety, one aspect, and I didn't put a slide on here, we're going to be coming out, if we haven't, within the last couple of days, I haven't checked in with our PI group, but Provo is relatively a very safe city from a vehicular crash standpoint. In fact, the joint announcement or a press release that we're going to be doing has to do with the Complete Streets Coalition did an analysis of 101 different metropolitan areas, and the Provo-Orem metropolitan area had the lowest pedestrian fatality rate out of all 101 metro areas. So we have a lot that's good that's going for us. And so when I say a crash problem, that's a crash problem for Provo. We're overall a very safe city when it comes to vehicle crashes.
I assume that puts us at some disadvantage, actually, competitively, which is a strange way to think about it. Like, you've got a disadvantage for being.
So we've talked about different ways that we might approach this in terms of putting in our grant application. I don't know that we should advertise that as hey, we want some safety grants, but we don't really have a safety problem. That's not the way that we want to say it. So we may not address that at all, but I think one of the things, because they did talk about in one of the webinars that I attended, that there are going to be municipalities that don't have as high a crash data as other municipalities. That doesn't necessarily mean that they won't get any funding. Because one of the things that they're looking for are municipalities who are willing to make the hard decisions to address safety within their municipalities. And obviously Provo was one of them based off of our data. So.
Okay. Go ahead, Councilor Whipple.
I was wondering if you also looked at the Provo Bicycle Master Plan as you were doing this. I know it's almost 10 years old, but.
Yeah, so we can look at projects that are addressed in there also. Really, what it is overall, and the bicycle master plan is actually referenced into the active transportation part of the transportation master plan. So yes, we want all of these things to kind of mesh together and not put aside any of them. So again, this one, we're going to have to look at, I believe to be competitive in this, we're going to have to look at where are our highest crash rates and show them that we're addressing the places that have the biggest problem. And here's some, and I think as Dave alluded to, if previously addressed, we're looking primarily at previously proposed solutions that could address this problem, and doing any further detail or additional analysis that we need to do that. We're not trying to fund, other projects that don't address safety. I'm not saying, there's, and I have things that this the final slide is projects, the type of projects that we're looking at. So I don't want that to be construed as saying we're trying to fund a road widening project with safety funds. That's not it. But we are looking at, we have addressed things that we believe will or have proposed projects in plans that we believe will address safety. And so we're looking at those. As we look at the corridors, we'll be looking at those first and saying, does this really address the safety problem that we're seeing? If not, let's take it where it's at and maybe tweak it to further address the specific issues that we're seeing.
Okay. And we're able to not worry about things like University Avenue and State Street because those are under the jurisdiction of UDOT?
No, we can go after those. So what we'll need to do is as we prepare those, if we decide that those are the corridors or an intersection we want to address, we'll need to get with UDOT and have them be a co-signer or at least a letter of support. I don't remember exactly what they say, but it's basically they're showing some support saying, yeah, if you give them the funding, we'll allow them to do that, implement that safety project on our corridor.
Right, because I understand UDOT's looking at redoing the viaduct.
Yep.
So would that be the kind, which is super unsafe for all users all the time. But if we wanted to add something to it, would we be able to ask for, kind of these enhancements using this grant?
So there are other grant opportunities that I believe are better suited to address the viaduct in particular. So I have been meeting extensively with UDOT on the viaduct project. We are committed to get some both bicycle and pedestrian improvements on there, provide some a safer crossing for vehicles, also provide some opportunity to continued opportunity to pass underneath, on the kind of frontage roads that go along there also. So yeah, we're very keyed into that. We are. I'm pushing as hard as I can, and they are addressing. We're working together to really bring everything that we need onto that viaduct. They realize that it doesn't have everything that it needs. We realize it doesn't have everything it needs, and yeah, we're committed to getting everything on there.
Okay. I'm also wondering about another safety concern that we've heard for years, and that is crossing the railroad tracks at different points. And clearly the railroad is a terrible entity to try to work with, but that's not something where we necessarily have a lot of crash data, but we have an incredibly dangerous situation, especially when you have people trying to go around and climb and everything. So have you considered some of those crossings or anything like that?
So we may look at that also. That's another one where I believe that they're going to look at that. There's other grant programs, and one from the I'm going to mess it up, Freight Rail Association, FRA, whatever that stands for, Freight Rail Association, I think, to look at doing grade separated crossings. So like a bridge, where right now we have at grade crossing and everybody's held up and it's a safety issue. So we may look at that again, as we look at all at this compared to the other funding opportunities that we have available. We'll need to make sure that we're not putting in a project for this grant funding that they're going to say, hey, we have something else for that, and just throw it aside. But the other thing that we already have done is those crossings are not only on our transportation master plan, but they're on the Mountain Association of Governments plan. So we can, even if for whatever reason, as we continue to see grant funding come out of this federal infrastructure bill, if for whatever reason none of those opportunities line up to where we can use that for the railroad crossings, we do have it on mag list, and every indication that it is a true planned thing that they that we can go after mag funding in future years. In fact, it was one of 6 that we put in for, and unfortunately they couldn't fund all of ours, but they did fund all but one. But the one that got dropped off of our funding request for this funding cycle was looking at least doing the environmental for the 500 West Bridge. So we'll go after that again next funding cycle in 2 years.
Okay, and then my last question is, would there be any value in doing something like changing speed limits from 25 to 20, which would have kind of a low grade benefit throughout the entire area instead of a concentrated benefit at one project site?
So they do talk about being able to use that for signage. I think even with that, again, where this is a $5 million minimum threshold, we could change the speed signs for far less than that. And we could talk about this further. I know Salt Lake just did that, and so there's a lot of excitement on a lot of people's part on trying to further that across the state, and specifically in Provo. One of the difficulties that we find as we've done after I became transportation engineer, and even before that, we have counters we go and put out on a lot of streets, and I've made sure that we almost never take them in. We have them going around so that we can compare all the data. And as we look at all the data, we have speeding on. People are already going over 25 miles an hour, and 25 miles an hour on local roads, going well over the speed limit on collector roads and arterial roads. I hesitate to change the speed limit to a lower speed limit until we can figure out a way to address the speed limit as it already is, which we are. I mean, we've changed our codes. We do projects all the time to try to lower the speed limit, but I don't think I think if we were to change our speed limit right now, again, that's maybe a side issue that we can discuss further, but that's where we're at.
So if we wanted to change the speed limit, we'd probably also want to do projects like bulb outs and other traffic calming measures.
I think we would want to implement those measures and make sure that we are actually lowering speed limits even closer to the 25 that's already signed before we lower it even further, and put people, even more out of compliance.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a real concern because the damage to a pedestrian or a kid on a scooter or a bike is significantly different at 20 miles per hour than it is at 30.
Yeah, which I understand. Again, we can discuss all these things, and these are ones that I think if we want to have a discussion is going to be. Those are things that I would encourage us to put on, on the docket after September 15th, because if we try to have too many of these discussions beforehand, then we're going to be hard pressed to meet that deadline.
Councilor McKay, you have more to present?
I do.
Okay, so.
Okay. Rachel mentioned that using it on State Street or UDOT roads, would that mean that UDOT would put up the 20%?
We could ask them.
Okay.
I don't know that they
Asking.
would say yes. Yep.
My other question was, where is this money coming from? It's federal. Is this from like Build Back Better, or where is it?
Yeah, this is the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed a year ago about. Okay. All right. So what you're going to see and what I'm going to be presenting on in 2 weeks, and then the plan that will be brought to you 2 weeks after that. The elements of the plan is that it needs to include an analysis of the existing condition and historic trends for both fatal and serious injury crashes. So it's not looking at every fender bender, but it's looking at specifically ones that are fatal or suspected serious injury. We'll look at the crash locations, the severity, any contributing factors, crash types. So we're looking at, is it pedestrian involved? Is it bicycle involved? Is it a T-bone crash at an intersection? Is it a head-on crash? So that we can really, delve into what is the improvement that could address a crash like this. We need to do an analysis of both a systemic and specific safety needs. So are there any features of the roadway that contribute to this, ongoing problem? We'll show all those high-risk locations on a map. So you'll see it, and this is what was included in, I believe it was Chapter 6. I'd have to look back, but anyways, a chapter in the Transportation Master Plan is a kind of a heat map of crash severity and crash, higher crash rates. And then we will also bring that specific list of projects, strategies, our suggested prioritization, and time ranges of that's required to be put in there, of time ranges of when you want to implement the longer, not every project is going to get done this year. So what's the long term plan? So again, the Transportation Master Plan looked at crash data from 2016 to 2018, and we'll be adding to that 2019 to 2021. The next one, and we'll go into this a little bit more, just a couple of examples that I have in a later slide, in a couple slides coming up, is Vision Zero commitment. So basically committed that we have a goal of eventually reaching zero roadway fatalities, zero fatalities and serious injury crashes on our roads. We'll develop measurements to measure the criteria of what shows it is being safer, and to monitor the progress. One of the requirements is that we assign a committee, task force, somebody to kind of monitor the progress of this. We propose using the Transportation Mobility and Advisory Council that would seem to fit well in line with what they were set up for. We'll include an assessment of our current policies, our guidelines, standard drawings, et cetera, and see if there's any of those that need to be updated to address crash or vehicle safety. And then in the end, we need to publish this safety action plan online. And as I mentioned earlier, we are proposing to add it as an appendix to the Transportation Master Plan. So as an example of a couple of quick examples of Vision Zero, UDOT has a 2016 goal, a specific goal of 40% reduction by 2030. So 40% fatal and serious crashes, which is about 2.5% annually. Salt Lake, it is our understanding, is also doing the same thing that we are, is updating and getting a safety action plan that will adhere to the check boxes for this grant application. And so we may see this update, but they have more of a general statement saying that they are committed to and eventually eliminating fatal and serious crashes within their jurisdiction. But then they also include links to crash data, the National Vision Zero Network.org. They have education materials and safety projects. So there's some of these things that we'll be able to implement by the September 15th deadline. But again, this is something that we intend to put with the Transportation Master Plan as an ongoing thing. And so we could create our own webpage that has similar open data. So that's a safety action plan. The type of projects, again, that we may be looking at is safety improvements along a road corridor. So this could be closing the sidewalk gaps, some of the projects that we brought to y'all in the past. Signal improvements, enhanced pedestrian crossings. We could look at safety improvements within a specific neighborhood that has higher crashes within that neighborhood. It could also be closing the sidewalk gaps or repairing sidewalk, improving the pedestrian lighting, traffic calming measures, safe route improvements. These are all things that are specifically in the notice of funding opportunity or specifically highlighted. We could also potentially look at an emergency response, which would be improved signs with lights at any place where either the fire department or the police will be pulling out. We could talk with them about doing preemption at signals. One of the things that the police have already asked us to take a look at, and we're preparing, I think it's 5 locations of areas where they could doing some improvements off to the side of the road where they could sit at some of the higher, I guess, intersections where there's a high rate of non-compliance that gives them a specific location out of traffic's way that they could monitor and go after when they need to. And then we could also use it for education and outreach materials. Again, where this is a minimum $5 million, I think if we did education and outreach, it would be part of an overall project.
So I had a quick question about this, especially the second bullet point. We had talked about Joaquin neighborhood at a previous meeting. Councilor Ellsworth and I met with the police chief at BYU, police chief here, and sort of talked about what can we do to improve coordination between BYU and the city to improve a lot of the safety issues there. And it was a little ambiguous as to who was in charge of what, given the 2 police departments, and you're talking about the interface between the campus and the city, where most of the problems seem to be happening and where we have, hundreds of students walking every single day. So I guess my question is, is this something that requires coordination with BYU as an entity, or can we just go ahead and say, we'd love to see the following happen? I mean, I was always a little unclear as to, as we often are, what can we hope BYU would be willing to do into city property? What could we do to help them in terms of a lot of it's messaging and instructing people and helping people know where to go? And then there was an issue about lighting and so on. Anyway, I'm just wondering if that's on your mind, especially that area.
So 2 locations that I can think of within that specific area is we are going through a design to redo the intersection of Canyon Road and University Avenue. And the thought is that if they, depending on what use they eventually have, so they're already going to start as they redo buildings. The arts department is going to move down to the Provo High School campus, Provo High School campus. So how many people will park on that campus versus how many will walk back and forth, we'll know in a few weeks, at least for the first semester. And we'll do some analysis. But if there is the way that they do that has a long-term, high amount of crossings right there at that intersection, then one of the thoughts that we've already looked at is, or already talked about is proposing a pedestrian bridge or a pedestrian tunnel. UDOT has brought up a pedestrian tunnel. I think given the utilities that we have through there, a pedestrian bridge is probably more likely. And so then the question becomes, to address your question, we'll have to have those discussions with the BYU. If we can get a grant will you pay the 20%, match? If you can get 80% of it paid for, and this is really for your students, will you pay 20%? And maybe I'm letting that out before we talk to BYU, but those are the type of discussions that we're going to have. We're also looking at, we're going to be meeting with the neighborhood. We'll see. I know y'all are looking at potential changes to the neighborhood program, but we need to meet with the neighborhood there in Joaquin and really help the students there, help us identify a couple of corridors that we could put some additional pedestrian improvements in the short term. And so it's going to be working with BYU, because they'll need to cross 8th North and get onto the campus too. So we'll be having discussions with the student population. We'll be having discussions with BYU. So yeah, we have discussions with BYU on a regular basis. And as we move forward, we'll need to at least keep up the amount that we have, if not increase, especially if we have more money for more projects coming in that we feel like we need to do around BYU, then yeah, we'll need to increase even our conversations with BYU, but we do meet with them on a regular basis.
Thanks. That's helpful to know.
Well, that's the end of my slides. So what other questions can I answer?
I've been asked a lot of questions about safety in Provo. Honestly, it's a lot from people who don't live in our community and who are interested in the successes that we've had, especially in active transportation. And so I'm curious how and I should finish that thought. One of the things that I tell them about our successes is that we have citizens that are very committed to pedestrian and bicycle safety, and they're very organized and they're very persistent. And but it's an asset, and I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for highlighting some of that in our application, or getting a letter of support from this Bike Walk Provo, who's an NGO who does a lot of this advocacy, or getting letters from MAG or WFRC, because both have shown a lot of interest and investment in Provo's success in safety and active transportation. Is that on your radar?
So what we need to do is talk with them about they actually had some specific guidance on, I guess, letters that accompany it, and they wanted to address specific. It can be from outside groups, so we could talk to it like a Bike Walk Provo, but it would need to address specific the specific projects that we're going after, saying this is what we're seeing and we agree this will address the problem. It would need to be something specific, not just a general.
Okay.
Letter of support.
Gotcha.
They specifically said they don't want just general letters of support.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of community support from Bike Walk Provo, and I think one of our state representatives is on Bike Walk Provo board, and so there's probably some more opportunities there.
Okay.
Councilor Whipple.
So you said that Freedom Boulevard is one that you're looking at. Is that right?
Yep.
So I know that area, especially in the downtown kind of part, acts as a terrible barrier for people wanting to cross the street, right? There's no lights, it's unsafe. People are like running across to Smith's and everything. But that's also an area of the city that is really ripe for redevelopment. So is there an economic consideration? Like, if we do this, not only will it be safer, but it will make this area more attractive for redevelopment and vibrancy?
I don't know that this safety grant specifically talks about that. We have talked about the potential for what do we do. So 300 North, for example, is one that has been brought to my attention by Bike Walk Provo and other advocates on multiple occasions. And we have discussed some ideas that is up to 300 North, between 200 North and 300 North, was being looked at, has been looked at by the same developer. My understanding is did the Freedom Commons that just got finished up. And so we have already discussed some ideas of things that we would bring to them to try to partner with them to get a good active transportation crossing there at 300 North. So it has been on our mind. I don't know if we would necessarily, I'd have to look back and see again how it's written, what the feedback has been to say, here's how we propose something like that as part of this grant application.
Yeah, well, that's an area that already has existing problems. And as we're doing new developments already with more office space, more apartment complexes that are high density, we're just going to have more people there. And so unless we do something to address those issues, I think the problem will be compounded.
Right, yeah, so again, we've got a light at, we've got a light at 200 north, and we've got a light at 500 north, and we're already, like I said, as it redevelops there on 300 north, we already know. If we can get so as we look at Freedom Boulevard, if this is a good opportunity to go after something to already do something on 300 north, then we could look at that also. But we already know that there needs to be some sort of enhanced pedestrian, safety issues there at 300 north, since that is supposed to be an active transportation corridor.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't, my Zoom went out. So. Any other questions? Well, thank you. We really appreciate your proactivity on this, and we appreciate the urgency of the timeline. And we're grateful that you're looking out for the Provo and looking for these funding opportunities. So we'll keep your calendar in mind that you presented to us. We recognize that you'll be needing us to be looking at things in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and if there's any follow-up questions, I mean, I believe you all have my email, so I'm happy to, and we'll respond, quickly to any inquiries, and as soon as we have some data that we can share, we'll share it with you to where, we're committed to make this something to where it's not a surprise when we come back with something that we want you to pass with the resolution on the 6th, that it's not going to be a surprise to any of you.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a break for 10 minutes. So we'll reconvene at, we'll call it 12 minutes, 2:15. Cookie break, bathroom break, whatever kind of break it needs to be.
Recording stopped.
This is a story
In progress.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We'll now move on to item number 6, which is a presentation on community development block grants, CDBG, programming and processes. And this will be presented by Melissa McNally, Community Grant Administrator. Thank you. And we have 55 minutes for this item. So there you go.
Is that on? There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so our division oversees 2 different grants from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And one is the Home Investment Partnerships Grant, and the other is the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, which is what we're going to discuss today. So I have a short video to show. Some of you might be new to this, and if you're not, I apologize, but it's just a really quick overview of how CDBG works. Do I point it this way? Okay, thanks, Malia.
This is a story about one way local governments get funding for community development. Here's Big City. Big City is a major metropolitan area. A lot of people live there. Big City has problems they need money to fix. Their roads are bad. One of their neighborhoods has a lot of abandoned homes. Some of the buildings downtown are deteriorating. There aren't enough jobs, and working class families have a hard time finding places to live that they can actually afford. Here's Small Town. Small Town has the exact same problems. For both Big City and Small Town, the problems are so large there just isn't any way for the local government to pay for solutions on its own. That's where Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, funding comes in. This is money from the federal government. Of course, the government isn't giving away funding for just anything. They say CDBG must go toward community development, and at least 70% has to benefit people with low or moderate incomes. The rest of the funding can be used for blight elimination or disaster relief, regardless of income. Big City says, we can fix the bad roads in low-income neighborhoods, eliminate blight, improve buildings everyone uses, build some affordable housing, and create jobs. So let's apply for CDBG. Because of their size and metropolitan status, Big City is actually entitled to CDBG funding. To get the money set aside for them, they send HUD something called a consolidated plan that says how they plan to use CDBG money to benefit low and moderate income people living in Big City. Small Town is not entitled to funding like Big City. Small Town actually has to apply to the state government for CDBG funding, and their project has to fit into the community development goals the state chooses. Funding is competitive, so Small Town might not get anything. Big City and Small Town apply, and they both get funding. Now if they want, they can subgrant CDBG funds to local organizations that specialize in community and economic development. That's the Community Development Block Grant Program in a nutshell. For technical information and application guidelines, visit hud.gov or look around your state government's website to see which agencies administer CDBG funding.
Thanks, Malia. Okay. So Provo City is an entitlement city. That means we get our own allocation every year from HUD, and it means we can also set our own goals. We're not subject to the state's goals for CDBG. So in line with that, in 2020, that's the last time that Provo City did a consolidated plan. And this is going to be, a really high level overview because it is it's a very complex grant system. So feel free to ask questions as we go. And if I happen to just blurt out an acronym that you don't understand, let me know, because the feds like to use lots of acronyms. So we did our consolidated plan, and we're required to do this to get our CDBG funding, and we did it in 2020. So in that year, we tell the federal government for the next 5 years, these are our funding priorities. And so every year when we do our action plan, which is a process we're just finishing up for the 22-23 fiscal year, we tell them, okay, this year we're focusing on these goals that we identified in our consolidated plan. So with that in mind, as we make our plans each year and every 5 years, every activity and goal that we set, we need to make sure it falls under some things that HUD has outlined. And the first is their national objectives. So every activity that we undertake has to meet one of these national objective criteria, is either benefit low and moderate income persons, aid in the prevention or elimination of slums and blight, or meet a need having a particular urgency. In addition to that, they also have locally targeted objectives that we also need to make sure each activity is fulfilling both the national objective and the locally targeted objective. So those would be decent housing, suitable living environments, and creating economic opportunities. So all of our projects that we do have to fall under at least one in both of these categories.
Could you explain the difference between decent housing and living environment?
Sure. So decent housing would just be just providing housing that's not substandard, that meets HUD's criteria of decent livable situation, that doesn't have code violations, that has the things that they feel like it should, working stove, refrigerator, bedroom, bathroom, that kind of thing. Suitable living environments has more to do with things like your parks. Are there parks in the neighborhood that help create recreational opportunities for people? Does that answer your question?
Curious about, so it's beyond the house.
It is, yeah. It could also include, better sidewalks, stuff like that.
Okay.
So with those two caveats in mind, in the 2020 consolidated plan, the funding priorities I'm going to go over. There are 4 different categories, and there are sub-goals listed with each category. And these were determined by council and citizen participation back in 2020. Well, it would have been 2019, but so the funding priorities are housing, public services, economic development, and public facilities. Under housing, we agree to assist in the expansion of housing opportunities for low and moderate income households and encourage diversification of housing stock. And the goals are to support housing programs that address the needs of updating aging housing stock through emergency and spot rehabilitation, support of rental assistance programs to special needs populations, support of development of new affordable housing to increase the number, types of affordability of both rental and home ownership, and to support down payment assistance programs that provide home ownership opportunities. And some of the project examples, these are projects that we have carried out through the first and second year so far of our consolidated plan. So for the last 2 years, we have done down payment assistance programs, construction of new affordable housing for homeowners, in Orem, construction of new affordable housing for homeowners in Salem, affordable housing for seniors in Orem, construction of affordable rental housing in Provo, our egress window program, and our emergency repair grant program. The majority of that list falls under our home grant. So a lot of those activities are conducted with home dollars. The last 2 are conducted with our CDBG funding. Next, we have public services, and our goals are to support organizations that provide services to populations with special needs, support organizations that provide healthcare services and health education, support organizations that assist at-risk youth, support organizations that provide education and job training, support organizations that provide housing services, and support organizations that provide services to seniors. I also wanted to note that in our public services, we are allowed, our HUD allows each grantee to allocate up to 15% of our total entitlement allotment to public services. And several years ago, the council decided to go up to the full 15%. I think before then it ranged anywhere from 7 to 10%. And they just decided to give the maximum amount allowable to assist our public service agencies. So the agencies that we've assisted in the last few years are Community Action Services Food Bank for their Circles program, their food program, and their housing support, the Boys and Girls Club of Utah County, the Children's Justice Center, Family Support and Treatment Center, the Food and Care Coalition, Mountain Lands Community Health Center, Project READ, Rocky Mountain University, Victims Services, and Teens Act. Next, we have economic development, and our goals are to support and improve visibility of small business storefronts, throughout Provo City, support local small business and entrepreneurs by providing mentoring and technical assistance, and utilize when available the Section 108 loan guarantees. And examples of our economic development projects are the facade program. It says downtown facade, but we've extended that program to include all of Provo City. We have a 108 loan outstanding that we use to assist with infrastructure to the airport. And I didn't specifically include COVID funding, but I wanted to in our economic development because that is one of the big things that we're moving right now is assistance to small businesses that were adversely affected by COVID. So, and we have our public facilities. We'll support the creation and improvement of public and nonprofit neighborhood community facilities and health centers, and support creation and improvement of public facilities and improvements such as parks, streets, sidewalks, etc. And examples of those projects that we've done in the last 2 years are capital improvements to the Alpine House, improvements to Children's Justice Center, our commercial facade renovation, our Family Support and Treatment Center, improvements, House of Hope, neighborhood revitalization, Turn Community Services, Public Works, the 600 South improvements by the pedestrian bridge, and the public Provo Parks, the 300 South Plaza on University Avenue. And then Public Works are doing Franklin neighborhood improvements beginning this year. So this is kind of a breakdown just to show you what that looks like as far as accomplishments go. For years 1 and 2 of the funding, this is what it has done to help our community. So the first is our economic development. There are 11 new jobs created, and the direct financial assistance would be 2 loans for, those were COVID relief loans. And then housing, 28 down payment assistance and housing new homeowners assisted. We've done rehabilitation, the code enforcement. That number is reflective of the neighborhood. So, and some of these bigger numbers, like the parks and recreation, those are the population that are benefiting from the parks and facilities. And then as far as public services, you've got the breakdown of the individuals there. And then over the pie chart on the side is a breakout of the income levels of those individuals. And then I just thought for informational sake that I would put what that looks like for a family of 4, the area median income. So. Do I have any questions about that before I move on?
Councilor Whipple?
Yeah, so on the park and recreation facilities, how are you getting that number? Is that just people in proximity to it, or are you counting actual users?
It would be people in the neighborhood, whatever neighborhood those parks are located in, or nearby neighborhoods.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So in our CDBG funding, we have what we call program income. That's money that the city receives back from projects that were loans. So HUD allows us to keep that funding so that we can take it and use it again. And so currently there's 602,327. Of that, the 413,103 is committed to projects. We've been able to reuse that. And the way that it works with the funding is after we close out the year and report to HUD our final program income numbers, then we'll next year reprogram that allocation. So the 189,224 will be programmed next year. The next funding that we have is entitlement. And this is the funding that HUD provides as reimbursement. And that's kind of how our grant works. Well, it is how our grant works with HUD. So we have our subrecipients and our agreements, and they spend and we pay them out of the general fund. And then we submit something to HUD to say, this is what we spent, this is what it was for, here's what that accomplished, here's who that helped. And then they send us the money to reimburse our general fund. So it says we have 2 million. That's like a promise of 2 million is really what it is. So we have, as of the end of the 21-22 year, we had 2.2 million. And then with the new entitlement for this year, it's 1,350,000 to give us just over 3.5 million in promised funding from the federal government. And that is all committed to projects. And we have 3 years to spend, 3 years from the time that we get the entitlement award to spend all of that promised money. So I just wanted to take a minute and go through the process of CDBG and how you can be involved and should be involved in the process. So from August to September, we like to reach out to council and to our residents and other interested parties to find out what are the funding priorities for the coming year? What do you want to focus? Which of the goals that we've outlined do you want to focus the funding on for the coming year? And once we have those determined, then we'll release a notice of funding available. We'll publish that and send that to our nonprofits along with what our prioritized goals are for the coming year, so they know which projects we're looking to give priority funding to. And then based on that, they'll submit a pre-application. We have them do a pre-application so we can look it over and make sure that the project that they're submitting and proposing is eligible for the CDBG funding. And then once that's determined, then the applications are submitted, and then that's when we get our committees together and the applicants come in and start making presentations to the committees to explain what their project is and how it's going to benefit the community. And then those projects are.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
I'm trying to jog my memory about my experience with this process in the past, and I'm struggling with that.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you solicit input from the council about priorities for the funding. And I just wonder if the last few years that's been more of a follow the plan that was already put in place in 2020, because I just don't recall this being a collaborative process. And I don't mean that to be offensive. It just feels like we get presented what the committee work is after, and then we say okay to it. Maybe I wasn't in those meetings where it was more collaborative.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I feel free.
No, I think that is probably a very fair assessment. And one of the great things I think about Melissa is she communicates very well. And we have, together, I think as a department, expressed a desire to be more collaborative and to involve you in the way you probably should have been involved all along. And so one of the reasons why she wanted to come talk to you today was to make sure that we begin that process to say, here's really how this process should work. Maybe it hasn't worked that way in the past the way it should have, or hasn't taken complete advantage of the opportunity the way it could have. And so we'd like to correct that and engage you. You may have a lot of things that you expressed that you'd like to do that we can't necessarily accomplish through these federal funds, but at least we ought to have the dialogue so that we can start to understand what your concerns are, what your interests are, and we can try to focus or align these funds to the best extent that we can to meet those objectives. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. And thank you for explaining the goals that you described in the 2020 plan. Again, maybe it's been presented multiple times, but that was really enlightening to me. I didn't realize that we had those set, for the next 5 years. I realized that we get presented on where we're at with the grants and where we're at in the process, but the original plan I wasn't part of. And so that was helpful. Anyway, I really appreciate this.
Okay. Well, great. That's going to change going forward, right? Yay.
I had a question about
Yes.
that. So it is August now. So are
Yes,
you
it
going to be
is.
wanting to come back in the next month?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I will.
Because I want to make sure
Probably
that
less
happens.
than a month. Is that okay?
What would you?
Probably less than a month. Is that okay?
Well,
In the very near future, let's get together.
absolutely.
Okay. Okay, so once the presentations are made, the committee grades the projects on certain criteria. Among those criteria are the capacity of the nonprofits, what other funding they have available, how successful they feel this project might need, how much funding they already have in place, how well it meets the national objectives and Provo City goals. And then recommendations are then made by the committees based on the scoring. And that is when you hear what the committee is recommending at public hearings. We're required to have 2 public hearings during that process. So you'll hear it a couple of times around April and May, and you'll make your final decision on if that's the way you want the projects funded or not. You do have the final say in that process. And then HUD releases sometime in May, hopefully before we get to our last hearing. So our final entitlement number for the coming year, but they'll release what those numbers are going to be. And then after we have our final council approval, we begin submitting everything to HUD for the annual action plan for their approval. And that kind of closes out the year. And then in July, August, so right about now, we start working on the CAPER, which is it's short for a Comprehensive Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. And that's another thing that I will bring to you in another month or so to say, this is how we performed this past year with our grant funds. And then that will be submitted to HUD to let them know how we performed. And then our consolidated plan is every 5 years. So around 2024, we will start another consolidated plan process. And let's see. Okay. So what I would like from you in the near future is to be able to sit down with you and identify what your funding priorities are for the coming year. I also want to invite you, and I will send updates when this happens, to sit in on those committee meetings, to hear those presentations. I think it's really important if you have the time. I know you guys are all busy, but to hear that from the nonprofits and see, what they're doing, and to hear from our public works and parks and the projects that they have coming online. There's a lot of great work being done in the city, which I'm sure you're all aware of. It's a good reminder when you're sitting in those committee meetings.
Councilor Ellsworth has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could share those meeting times and dates with our staff, and then they can put it on our calendars. We can hopefully attend.
Okay, I would be happy to. Okay. And I would want to remind you, and I will when the time comes, that it's an observational role only, that the committees need to be free to just talk amongst themselves and not have any input from me or from council.
It's a very polite way of saying, don't be disruptive, don't speak.
And again, once the funding recommendations are decided, you'll hear those recommendations. And again, just to remind you, you do have the final say in how things are actually funded. So, do you have questions for me?
Councilor Ellsworth.
I thought that in the past that the neighborhood chairs were involved in the CDBG process. Is that through that committee?
It is through the committee. Yeah. So we are required to have on our committee representatives from our low and moderate income neighborhoods. And that's why we've had neighborhood chairs specifically from those neighborhoods that are identified as CDBG eligible neighborhoods. And that just means that those neighborhoods have 51% or more of their population is below the area median income.
Okay.
So
that's just a note, I think, for myself and for the council and the staff, that if or when we change the neighborhood chair program, that's in different parts of our code, and we need to address or clean that up or clarify that. And there's other ways to involve people from low income neighborhoods, whether or not they are part of the neighborhood program. Like it could be soliciting people from the PTA in low income neighborhoods, things like that.
Perfect.
Other questions? I'll just echo what Mr. Shipley said. I've been on the council for 4.5 years, and this is more light shed on it than I've had. So I really appreciate it. It's very helpful. And I appreciate the opportunity to learn and observe up close the process. Because when I have had those presentations, that's always the question that comes to my mind is, what were the criteria? What were the requests? What were the needs?
Yeah.
So it always felt a little hard to say no at that point to anything because I didn't have enough information.
Yeah. If you want.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
I think we're all really excited about this change. Some of the energy that we're seeing in this department is really refreshing, and we're getting a lot of comments like from you and from our external agencies as well, that it's kind of a breath of fresh air, and in ways that they hadn't been included in the past, or the process had been more difficult than they wanted to be involved in, that they see that change, and they're excited by that and encouraged by that. And I think it's really a great opportunity. I'm thankful for Melissa and her direction, her attention to some of this stuff, and it's a relief. And I think it's a great opportunity for us. I'm really excited about what this program is going to look like and how it's going to function in the future.
Thanks.
So I did want to say, a few months ago, John Magnus had said that you all wanted to take like a deep dive into CDBG and things. And I knew there was no way I could take a really deep dive in just a shorter amount of time. So if there are questions about anything related to CDBG or home, please reach out to me. I'm happy to address anything. You can shoot me an email if you have funding questions, or if you want to see like a scoring sheet that's been used in the past, anything at all. I am happy to share that with you. Just reach out to me and we'll make that happen.
We appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, sorry.
One more
Mr.
quick
Schiller.
question while we've got you here. So now that there's this position of, we're kind of a liaison with more than just our city, right? With some of this funding,
Yes.
obviously. It's always been a question in my mind, how we're determining, how to break that up and how to share, these grants and make sure that geographically they're covering all these different places. Do you have some kind of process for that, or is it just prioritized by how good the opportunity is, or help us understand a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do need to make sure that whatever we're funding has a priority of Provo, serving Provo residents. We do break up the funding according to the population. So the organizations will a lot of them track where these people are coming from. And so they're able to break out that way, like how many residents are from Provo, or how many are from Orem, and how many are from the county. And then we just break that out by percentages if we're all going to fund one project. Like this last year, we're all funding Mountainlands Community Health Center. So we get those demographics from them, and then we fund accordingly so that it's proportionate to the population that they're serving. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Appreciate it.
Councilor Whipple.
Yeah, so I remember doing CBDG projects like Paint Your Heart Out, and I know my neighborhood benefited from those down payment grants and things in the past. But what I really liked about the Paint Your Heart Out and then the Plant Your Heart Out is they were real community building events, as well as benefiting the neighborhood. But it doesn't seem like we're doing those anymore. Is that because nobody's been asking to do it?
Yes.
So if we had a neighborhood chair that says, I want to organize this, then we would consider refunding it?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there is funding in the neighborhood revitalization. So that's where we did the funding before from Paint Your Heart Out. And I don't think we've done a significant project for several years. I think the last one we did were in Franklin and Mazer, were the last big Paint Your Heart Out projects, and they were wonderful.
Yeah.
A lot of community. It's great to see neighbors show up for each other that way. Yes. But there's not been interest. I don't know if people just don't know, or we just haven't had like motivated neighborhood chairs or a neighborhood person to kind of rally everybody to make that happen. So
I've been having people ask me if we can do it again, and I'm worried that I might be the person who has to organize it. But thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Looks like no. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. All right. We've gained a few minutes, which we're probably going to need anyway. So we're going to go on to item number 7, which is a discussion regarding American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA fund appropriations. So we have various staff items here. I don't know if everyone can see the bullet point list. They're not organized according to departments. And I thought it might be easier to just kind of knock out, Parks and Rec, Public Works. Does that sound easier than going back and forth? Okay.
Let's make them debate it. It's free for all.
Councilor Ellsworth is suggesting a debate about how to do that. Just want to make sure that was part of the public record. You said that without a microphone. So,
Okay.
so why don't we start? Parks and Rec is listed first here. We'll just start. Parks and Rec has bathrooms at Parks, Regional Sports Parks Complex, and Slayton Rock Canyon improvements. So why don't we just cover those 3? Yeah, please.
Just to introduce this a little bit, and maybe for the sake of the department heads that are here to present, the ARPA committee is trying to look at and evaluate and consider, all the different projects that might be out there, both from council suggestions and from administration. And one of the challenges that we're having is that we have all these unanswered questions about all these different projects, what it costs, how long it's going to be, what would it happen with or without ARPA money? I mean, there are a lot of concerns and considerations that we have on each one of these that we just don't feel like we have good information on. So hopefully today is an information gathering, and an ability for us to ask the questions from the council. And that was our intention anyway. So I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you to the directors who are here to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. And I'll just add too, I like to think of these funding opportunities as sort of win-wins, in the sense that if we decided to fund certain opportunities, that maybe presumably frees up funding that you would have spent on that for something else. And that is, so to the degree that you have any sense of how that might benefit other projects, to the side, that would be helpful too. So go ahead. It looks like Doug Robbins will present to us. And, I'll try to manage the time roughly. I don't really have a clear sense since we didn't, put minutes on each of these items, but if we can get through all of these in the next hour to hour and 20 minutes, that'd be great. So I'll just be watching the clock. Thanks.
Okay, I'll try not to take all the time.
You're pretty good, Doug. You've never been long-winded in my experience, so.
Thanks. Okay, if we could advance 2 slides, please. Okay, first one is, well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity that we really do look at this as a win-win opportunity to replace or actually address an issue that has been brought up by council. We do listen, and most of our restroom replacements are in a restroom replacement schedule in our CIP that are planned out. But this one here at Memorial Park is one where we constructed a playground with CDBG funds back in 2007. And at that time, the design committee that helped us design the playground wasn't as interested in a restroom facility, but it is a site that really could use one. And as things change, we think that there's space available there, and this would be a great opportunity to integrate a restroom into this site close to the playground. The park is getting more and more use all the time, and we really think it could be a big win-win for the community. The cost estimate we have here is $495,000. It would probably be between $450,000 and that amount. That's about the cost that Spring Creek Park restroom costs in today's dollars to construct one similar to that. So it would be traditional stalled restrooms with some family use restrooms as well, 2 of those at the front. So that is one opportunity. We have a couple of other places with playgrounds without restrooms, but they are typically underneath UPNL high energized power lines, transmission lines, and they won't allow us to build structures directly underneath. So those are a little bit problematic. At Lakewood, that is one area with the expansion of the park to the south would have some space to install a restroom at that point in time. So any questions on this one?
Any questions?
Thank you. I'm the one who was pushing for this because I've pushed kids on the playground there many times and had to leave in a terrible hurry to make it the 8 blocks home.
That's understandable.
We won't ask how that went. All right.
Okay, the next slide would be Rock Canyon, Slate Canyon improvements. Right now, to give a little bit of some background on Rock Canyon, we're really poised right now to move forward with Rock Canyon. We've completed the master plan, working with our partner, the Rock Canyon Preservation Alliance, for several years in acquiring 18 acres of property at the mouth of the canyon. And also recently, within the past 2 weeks, we've been awarded a grant funded from the TTAB Utah County contribution of just a little over $1.9 million toward this project. So as dollars have continued to kind of pool up, and then with the contributions from the RCPA, that's really making this project closer and closer to moving forward with those master plan improvements. Right now, we need to have construction documents drafted. And if we could get started on that right now with funding, we could be under construction probably early spring of 2023 at Rock Canyon and complete that one, which would free us up to do some other projects like you'd mentioned before. So we really look at the remaining construction costs of 1.4 being a combination of, if they're not funded through ARPA, through a combination of fundraising, our capital accounts, and then also a future council action. Moving on to Slate Canyon, we recently, just in 2021, acquired that additional 26-acre parcel, which really changed the canvas that we get to design upon. And so we are looking at initiating a design process starting here next month, engaging the community and also the council to make sure that we're all aligned very, very well in the design of this opportunity here at Slate Canyon. I've also been having some preliminary meetings with Public Works to make sure that we're all aligned that way as well. with the structures that they have on site. But we really look at this as potentially being a similar format to Rock Canyon, the developments at Rock Canyon, the master planning effort there. We did listen to council in the last budget preparation cycle and included $250,000 for this master plan effort. So that is already currently funded. So we would move forward, and depending on the master planning effort, what we came out with, that would really determine the overall project cost of these recreational elements at Slate Canyon.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Yeah, it might be hard to estimate right now, but given what you know about parks in general, do you have any ballpark estimation for what phase one or the next phase at Slate Canyon is going to cost?
It's a tough one. It's kind of a moving target because there's so many opportunities there. But I do know that, as I remember, the next phase of that park on the last master planning effort was somewhere between $5 and $6 million. So that, if that puts it in perspective, but with the addition of, this 26 acres, it almost adds another third of the land that we have available to kind of work upon. So it really depends on the scale of what we design and really what your intent is for the overall scale and scope of this project.
Okay, but with the last iteration of the plan, the next phase would have cost $5 to $6 million.
I think that was the engineer's estimate at the time. Mhm.
Okay, gotcha. That's really what citizens see, right? They don't necessarily see the plan and feel like the city's committed to them. They see the implementation and feel like the city's keeping their commitments. So,
You bet.
thanks.
So I had a question. I know, and it's helpful to have Public Works here as well. And maybe when Public Works speaks to us, we can get some clarification. I think what has concerned me is that I'd like to make sure that we're not working at cross purposes, but we're actually collaborating between the aquifer project and the master plan. Because I could imagine that if there isn't coordination and alignment, those two could potentially work against each other, right? Where you put in a new road and then you have to tear it up because you got to do some other work with the aquifer project. And so I think maybe at a later point, it would be helpful to sort of hear some proposal from the two departments about how to consolidate the plan for both the aquifer project and the master plan so that we have some sense of and I don't know, and maybe Mr. Decker could speak to this later, if there's some way, if some of the funds for the aquifer project, if those are included, restoring the portion, if any portion of the mouth of the canyon gets torn up and then there's a restoration effort, that's kind of what the master plan is calling for. I'm just brainstorming off the top of my head where there might be opportunities to save money rather than spend twice on something like that. And this money that you've mentioned does not include the roundabout that is proposed for 1450 East. Is that correct?
No, it does not.
Does not. So that's something that we've talked about in the past. And again, maybe when we hear from Public Works, we could get a sense of if that's in the CIP. Is that coming? Does that need to be timed better with this project? Is that something that needs to happen simultaneously with the redesign of some of the parking lot structure, for example? And if so, how are we going to make sure that we don't, again, build something that we have to tear up later? I just have lived through this in my own backyard, so I'm experiencing PTSD about like how important it is to think of multiple projects simultaneously so you don't double spend. So that's something I'd be interested in going forward. So the 3.4 then, or 3.5 roughly, the gap there, almost 1.5 million, would need to be fundraising, capital, council support. So that's still something that we need to consider as a council as to where that funding would come from, if there's opportunities in the ARPA or in other funding opportunities that the city is jumping at here to cover that gap. My worry is we've got two canyons that have have had master plans that were funded and, built up expectations in the citizens. And I want to deliver on those expectations as soon as possible. They are extraordinarily highly used in our community. I think we saw that in our survey. I don't know if they went into the weeds on which canyons and whatnot, but the priorities that citizens in this community give to our trails and recreational opportunities are extremely high. And I hope we don't forget these are amazing assets to our community. Among the very highest and most valued things in our community is this immediate access to the mountains from a residential area. There are very few places in the country that have that kind of opportunity, and they're both suffering. They've both suffered neglect over the years and ecological degradation, graffiti, mining deeds and whatnot, bullet holes, what have you. And I think it's really time that we give these canyons the priority they need. Anyway, that's my little soapbox, but any other comments or questions from the council about Slate and Rock Canyon improvements? Okay, we'll move on to the soccer complex.
Thank you, Council. To talk about the regional sports complex, we looked at it from a point of what makes us unique, why support this project, and we tried to include the questions of timing, funding, process, and success within that. So right now we are requesting 5.5 million, and that was supported by the administration on the submittal for funding through these discretionary funds. First reason we talk about is our local kids need a place to play. These are not just soccer fields. These are lacrosse. These are rugby. These are ultimate. These are all growing sports that are happening. And right now we have 330 plus teams that are playing on 11 fields in our community. Those people that with children in soccer know what life on the road means, because you are constantly traveling. You're never hosting a tournament in Provo. And that is a burden on our local families. This will also serve as a West Side super park in that this will have 100 acres of athletic turf, but also you see amenities of 45 pickleball courts, pass system around the entire park, playground systems in every quadrant of the park. So families either watching the kids or visiting that park will have a place to play. Right now, we're signing up for fall soccer, and we have hundreds of kids on our waiting list. And one of the factors by not taking these kids on our waiting list is that we don't have a place to play. And so thank goodness we have an active, healthy community in Provo. So this will have a local benefit, and then we'll talk about some of the other benefits of bringing people to our community, as in one of the other reasons to support this project. This has come as a project of timing. Originally, it was listed as a visionary project in our master plan. And we went through Land and Water Conservation Fund mitigation for some property that Provo City had that the school district needed adjacent to Timpanogos High School. And that we felt like we overachieved in garnering that mitigation site into 100 acres out on the west side. Then the Provo River Delta started. All those soils that they have dug up have gone to that site. So we have now are raising 100 acres, somewhere between 8 and 12 feet. And we have done though with them bringing the dirt, hauling to us and putting it in place. That's close to $6 to $8 million in value. So hopefully you feel like when we come up here, we don't normally come up here and say, Council, you are our only funding source. We take a project, come up with unique ways to attack it and do this. So this discretionary funding opportunity is rare. It's rare in my career here. And this was something that, as we put all this together, that we'd be excited for this opportunity for the regional sports park. With $5.5 million investment, then we can be irrigating turf playing surface this next year. and working through it. That escalates this project rather than the slow move bootstrap that we have been doing right now. We're able to escalate and start getting the benefit about this. And then let's talk about that benefit. Economic impact, another reason to support this project. We worked with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and they did the study of over $30 million of spending in our community would be created by this regional sports park. We gave a presentation with our friend Keith Morey in economic development, and he said there's nothing else that we could do as an improvement that would have a larger impact on our spending in our community than a project like this. You don't have to do too much research to see the billions of dollars generated nationwide through youth sports programs and traveling programs. We have, since we've been working on this project, now we have a synergy with a new airport, creating travel to the community. And we're also really come to ask the question, and Bill Fillmore, who started out with our Parks and Recreation Board when we were discussing this as a visionary project, now has been able to say, and I think every time I see him is, when are you guys going to get this thing done? And when do we want the benefit of this? This is something that is going to affect us immediately. We talk about this coalition of coming together. This is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who we purchased the property from, who were excited about this community use of the project and helped us with the pricing of this project. We have federal, state, and county that have all contributed toward this. Parks and recreation sources have been utilized, and private fundraising is also a part of it, especially in the pickleball complex areas. So we have pulled in every funding source possible, but we do need to get to a finish line, and that's why we're coming to the council, is we do need you on this one. I hope you see in Rock Canyon and Slate Canyon, once we have a master plan in our hands, we go to work and we go funding, and rarely do we ever come and just say, fund us. We look at, all the different grants and all the different funding available, and we try to find those. We've done that on this project, but we need your help on this one, council.
Thank you. Councilor Whipple.
So my understanding on this is that if we use ARPA funds, we'll be able to accelerate the completion of this park
Dramatically.
by a couple of years. What is the plan for funding it if we don't do the ARPA funds?
Then, then we're out there and we're looking for other opportunities. We're back into a hustle, which sometimes they turn out and sometimes they don't. So the impact could be a couple years, or it could be more than that, just depending on what's available out there in sources.
So even though you guys are great at hustling, we don't already have $500,000 budgeted every year until this thing is completed, or something like that, right?
Right. Yeah. When we put forth the CIP, that's before discretionary funds are available. We tried to come up with sources to try to get us close to the finish line. And we even ahead of that time, because some of that was income not received, we always put in there a council contribution to bring us to the finish line on it, to be able to get to a project of this size completely off grants. And you can only go back one time. We're talking about going back to some other sources for some of the new amenities that are going into this. So we're still going through that process, but I think this is that guarantee that in this fiscal year that we're able to deliver and get this thing done.
Councilor McKay.
Our parks and open spaces are so important. It's so rare to find one that will have the economic impact that this has. And that's what I'm most excited about, and increasing our ability to capture those funds. I know my son has been in club soccer for 11 years, and we spend a lot of money in Salt Lake, Mesquite, St. George, and Vegas. You have to do hotels, you have to do food, you have to, we pay a ton to use the fields, and we've never once had anything in Provo Orem because they don't have the amenities needed to do that. And so all of us clubs spend so much money in different cities. So I think this is brilliant. I think it'll help the West Side a lot, and it'll just give us more funds to go towards parks and the canyons and, the other things where we want to get those done sooner.
And because Utah is in a regional association that you're traveling to with Nevada, Idaho, all those areas, Utah is always at the top of being ready to host. But if you don't have a facility, then it just moves down that next slot. So the impact is going to be almost immediate. And we love to have a number of families just like the McKay family coming to Provo in the summertime when we're operating this in the prime season, and be able to come up here and do that same spending and support in our community that you have done for the region with your family.
And I'm surprised because I go to these tournaments and we have people from Washington State, Colorado. So people are flying in. So I think even having the airport by here will be another asset for teams.
There are youth teams traveling by private jet now.
Crazy.
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Henderson, thank you for a solid presentation. Just wanted to clarify a couple of things. When you talk about 30 million of local spending generated, you're talking annually?
Yes, annually.
So that's a $30 million annual impact. And we really don't get those kind of economic impacts from any other facility outside, to a lesser extent, the Parks and Rec building. Our main Parks and Rec building, and the ice sheet, right?
Right. There were some that attributed having our regional ice sheet in our community for keeping some hotels open. I think John Garfield at the Marriott sent a letter, an email over saying how having a sports facility like that in the community kept them afloat during the tough times of COVID and lesser travel. So that impact. So we have reached a lot of potential with people coming to Provo to play their hockey tournaments. So this is not Parks and Recreation's first rodeo in a regional sports site.
Yeah. So every year we delay on this, we're likely to forfeit 30 million plus in spending here in the community, right?
That's correct. Yeah. If it's not done, then they're not coming.
Secondly, the other forfeiture, if I understand correctly, is if we don't move on this quickly, we also forfeit some funding that has been lined up. Can you explain that for us?
You bet. When we did the mitigation of the site, there was a timing requirement of which the federal government has been patient with us, especially with the difficult times of COVID in those areas now. But eventually, we have to finish that. And we feel like with quick movement by the council like this could open up, other funding sources, which releases capital and which goes towards, as we, just what we've talked about today, as we get Slate Canyon and that master plan, or be able to sell that and be able to get funding for this, it times out perfect to go into our sequencing of funding these other exciting elements in the city. So I think as other opportunities come and as the timing of this moves up, then if we're able to create other funding sources, at which we like to do, then we're able to free up those to do other park development. And we listen to the council, and the administration listens to the council, and we know that the canyons are a priority, which is why Doug talked about, we already funded the master plan, knowing that that's a priority of this council.
So remind me, how much money has been allocated by the county, and what is the forfeiture possibility there if we don't act quickly?
The county has allocated 2.5 million, and they have set a deadline for 2027 to be able to have this operational by that time. So that money has been allocated, but has not been spent. It's a reimbursement grant, because as we're working through this funding process, by activating this, if we activated this 5.5 million, then we could also activate that 2.5 million, because we were going to meet that deadline for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you for those clarifications, and I appreciate also the emphasis. I think you may have quoted Keith Morey that this is the #1 economic development potential project in the city, far and above whatever's in second place, right?
Keith would have to refer to that. Sometimes he doesn't tell us about the second place, they're always a secret.
Okay, but thank you. That's for your presentation.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. The LWCF mitigation site deadline, you went over that kind of quickly, and I'm not sure I caught. Is there So what's the deadline that's associated with that?
So that deadline has passed. We are subject to federal government patience right now. I think being able to show this momentum and this movement and the project funded, then they would be able to, that could possibly even open up eligibility for Land and Water Conservation Fund grant for this specific site also, and be able to put that towards development too. So we see some opportunities there.
So, and this is maybe also partly for newer counselors. This is in relation to the Banus Park.
Yeah, Tim Kiwanis Banus
deal that required us to develop a park elsewhere.
And to use those proceeds towards purchasing a park of equal or greater value.
Okay. And you're saying that deadline has already passed?
It has. We have a great relationship, and they have seen the progress that we're making on the site. And we just happen to be cooperating with the federal government on taking their soils and all that. So we have a good cooperative relationship there,
okay.
But no one wants to test the patience of the federal government.
Thank you. I've been very excited and supportive of this project all along. I hate to see a situation where we have to say, well, let me go back to the Rock Canyon thing for a second. The 1.9 that's been promised by the county, is there, if we don't cover that gap relatively quickly, what kind of a bind are we in at that point?
I think there's always a risk from taking money and being awarded money and leaving it sitting there too long.
Yeah.
The county was very excited about the regional sports park and a time frame being developed. Doug, I don't think they put a time frame on that. 5 years? Okay, they did 5 years. So the idea of getting that grant, the county likes to promote movement on that too. But I really feel like we could sit down between Administration Council, Parks and Recreation, and with our fundraising group of the Rock Canyon Preservation Alliance. I think we're pretty close to the answer on that one. I think we're really close.
Well, I don't want to make this an either or kind of decision. I mean, it seems to me that we should be able to move forward on both without sacrificing one or the other. The Slate Canyon portion of that worries me. But I do know that we have to have that revision done before we really know what stage 1, stage 2 of implementation will look like. So I do want to at least vocalize my support for accelerating that process of that master plan on the heels of that purchase, so that because I think there was community expectation about what that might mean. And there were already, complaints about the fact that the previous master plan hadn't been enacted and that some of the things that had been done hadn't worked out so well. And so now there's a chance to kind of reboot that whole process. And I don't want to delay that. And maybe if this funding goes forward, I don't know, you've kind of alluded to it, but I'm wondering if we can then say, okay, well, if we're looking at a potential $5 million in the next several years, once we get that master plan revised that we need to implement that plan, let's make that a priority. Since this money was spent on this, then maybe that kind of frees us up to accelerate that's what I was referring to earlier, sort of the double benefit of external funding, is that, you can fund the project you want, but then you can accelerate other projects behind it.
This could be that example. If we were able to garner other external funding and release internal funding, and then move that towards the next project, like Slate Canyon. Slate Canyon may be one of the most exciting projects that we'll ever work on in our career, but just from the conversations, and Shannon's been in that group the whole time with their neighborhood, the group is talking about a very different park than what was the master plan early on. And so, talking about, mountain biking courses, a number of different things that are exciting now. So maybe one of the great things is we have a chance to do a real current reset and have funding follow up right after this master plan with the, focus of administration and council on funding that. And we can have the current desires of the citizens now being followed up with a really exciting project at Slate Canyon.
All right. Well, we've talked quite a bit. We got to move on, but Rachel or Councilor Whipple, go ahead. Yeah.
So what I'm understanding is that if we can put the full 5.5 million into this, then you will use your hustling efforts for other projects because you won't have to hustle on this one. But
Right.
there's not already a pot of money where, because we're spending on this, we can't just redirect it. You have to create that pot of money every time.
We now have 2 projects that we can go out and try to find outdoor recreation grants, those type of things. And if they're interested in the regional sports park, that frees up internal funds like impact fees to go to another one. Or if they're interested, we can hustle for Slate Canyon and not have 2 projects competing against each other on that. And we're able to set that focus in so we can become really directional with our funding priorities.
Okay. How bad would it be if we only funded this at 4.5 million?
I think everything has an impact,
Yeah.
you know,
But
so
would that impact be like slow it down a year or?
probably.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You know, we still have to get all those bids and all those costs and all those elements. So sometimes a partial pull from something, but you know, as we're getting to those finish items and all those things, I think, you know, we really look at this opportunity as the number to get us to that finish line.
All right. Well, we really appreciate that. This is very helpful. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be able to ask you questions if we have further questions. So thanks. All right. Why don't we turn to Public Works? And we have sidewalk repair work, water conservation efforts. Is that it?
That's all we saw.
That's all you saw. That's all I see. Okay.
I'm going to be doing the sidewalk repairs. I brought Dave Mickelson up here because he's the project engineer that's leading the charge to do the study on all the streets and all the sidewalks throughout the whole city. It'll be done in about 2 weeks. And from that study, we prioritize our sidewalks. And so any questions about that, I wanted to let him kind of address that. Just kind of a quick overview. The council gives us about $500,000 a year to go out and do sidewalk repairs. And so that's what we see as our budget each year. Some of that is installing new sidewalks. It's fairly limited where we have little pieces missing. The majority of it is to repair sidewalks. Sometimes we put it in where there's another capital project where a stormwater is tearing up some sidewalk. We'll come back and put the sidewalk in and team up with other projects. So that's a brief introduction. And so I'm ready to hear what you have to say, what your thoughts are, questions.
Questions, Mr. Shipley?
I'll just ask, so at the pace of 500,000 a year, I mean, give us some kind of sense of what kind of dent we're making or how are we doing?
Yeah, how are we doing?
Are we falling behind, I guess?
How many years behind are we based on 500?
So we went out and met with the community chairs for the west side with the new school coming in, and we sat down with them to see, and we picked out 6 projects that we thought were really critical for sidewalks. The price was about $7 million, and that didn't do the whole thing. I just kind of got the key ones they needed. We met with the Joaquin Group, community chair, talked through theirs. Theirs was about another $5-6 million. And I assume as we go through each community, we're going to find similar type bike, walking, getting sidewalks. Some of this is right of way, having to get storm drained in once you put the curb and gutter. It just goes into a very large cost. So we want to focus on safe walking routes. So we look at where the police have to have a crossing because we need another 300 feet of sidewalk, and then we can eliminate or we can help facilitate. And so the 500 is great. We appreciate it a lot. Each year, I've only been here 6 months, so I'm going to say each year because it seems like it, but we put in a supplemental request for additional sidewalk money to try to accelerate what we see are the demands or the needs. There's a lot of requests for sidewalks, and I probably didn't answer your question. I gave a good bureaucratic answer.
Well, maybe this question. So on the current requests, the current prioritization list that we have right now, at 500,000 a year, how many years does it take for us to just dig through what we already have as far as basic repair work to be up and running? I'm just trying to get a number in my mind of how far behind we are on basic repair.
So you can come up here. That's why I brought this.
I think for basic repairs, so generally how we have the basic repairs is from resident reports. This year, we're having a group from Utah State do a survey on all of our sidewalks. So that's going to include trip hazards from quarter inch to completely destroyed sidewalk. So we're going to have a wide range of everything in the city. And if we continue at the rate we're at, I would guess that we probably do a mile of sidewalk every year. At this rate, we're probably 30 years behind.
Based on what we're going to hear from USU or based on current complaints that are prioritized because of local?
I would assume from what we hear
feedback.
from Utah State.
Okay.
We're just going to add, I think Gordon and David are, relatively new. The last time we looked at the entire list of, and this was just complaints. This was not USU coming in and doing studies. Just the list that we track in engineering. It was estimated, if I remember right, about $55 to $60 million short. So at $500,000, you're talking 10 years at least just to get the complaints done.
It's good to have institutional knowledge. I was just sort of thinking I was hearing this.
So I have a quick, maybe it's related to CDBG because I saw sidewalks on there, right? How does that interface with?
So we have some CDBG projects going on right now. We have areas where we're replacing the handicap ramps, and we're also, as you mentioned, we have the new pedestrian bridge going over the railroad tracks. So I think it's about 600,000 that we're doing the first mile. So where that bridge comes down on both sides on the north side of the tracks, there's no sidewalks leading to it. So we're getting the sidewalk network built into the city, and that's CDBG funds, and that will be this year's project to be ready. So when the bridge is done, that sidewalk, it's important to get that because that looks at diverse neighborhoods and making sure that we're addressing everybody's needs throughout the community on those kinds of things.
Councilor Whipple.
Yeah, so I'm so excited about this sidewalk survey report, but I would like to know like what the priority scale is for addressing different issues that come into complaints. Because, if there's, a little hole or gap or something, that's one thing. But if you've got a 2-inch ledge, then that's an entirely different mobility accessibility type of issue. And I live in a neighborhood with 2 people in wheelchairs who are going on the sidewalks, and there are at least 3 of those ledges, those unevenness that cause real problems. And if we can understand and help our community understand what the priority is when they report something like, okay, this is a lower priority thing. We will probably get to it in 3 years. Thank you for your patience. Or glad you told us that. We will get on that right away, because this is the kind of feedback that I think we can get from the survey and that we can then get to our neighbors.
Because of the big demand, when we hear things like that, if we know that there are people that are in wheelchairs in areas, that does make a difference. Just because we do have that 3-inch gap in a number of different places, but if we know it's specifically impacting, that helps us in, because we know we can't do everything. And so we have tried to address complaints that are older than a few years and try to make sure we're hitting some of those things.
Well, it almost sounds like you're giving me a cheat code so I can tell people, hey, when you call 311, tell them there's a wheelchair right next to you.
Well, yeah, and we do care about our residents, and we want the sidewalks to add mobility. And I'm getting old, so I start shuffling. So those make a difference to me too. But you need to put it in for you where you get the most bang for your buck. Because if we just started one side of the city, started through the other, we're going to miss some golden opportunities to really help people. So we do take in the public input, and that is important to us. So absolutely, Dave's looking for friends, so have him get input, and we will make sure that is considered as we put our priority list together.
So the last thing I'd like is after you get this survey and everything, I would love if you could use that to construct a long-term plan with a budget and say, what you think would be appropriate for starting to address this backlog so that we can plan in our budgeting to help you on it.
Absolutely. And that's what it's intended for. So we'll be giving a presentation to you when that gets here.
And it seems like that survey would mitigate against the possibility of, the problem with a complaint-driven system is some people don't file complaints, right? And other people are very vocal, and so the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so we could be passing up neighborhoods that really need it, and nobody's reporting anything.
It is a delicate situation. We try to be careful, but yeah, we do listen to the public, but this criteria will help us be a little more systematic and methodical as we go through it, and not just here's squeaky wheels. So
it's great. Okay, thank you. Anything else about sidewalks? Okay, we'll move on then to the second item in Public Works, which is water conservation efforts.
Thank you very much. Let me correct a couple of things. I reported on the sidewalk, I think I said 55 to 60 million. I think it was 5.5 to 6 million. I think that's the math for the 10 years. I apologize for that. So the number's not quite dramatic. The years are correct though.
I was about ready to say we should bond for it.
I think the last time we looked at it, we had about 10 years worth just on the current list of repairs. So I apologize for doing my math on the fly there. So one thing that Rob Hunter just mentioned to me before I go into water conservation, I think it's important for the council to understand on the regional sports park, there is a need for some roads. We've stressed this with the administration a couple of times, and understanding, there's a park element that's needed for the regional sports park, but there's also some street improvements that need to be done there. And we emphasize that with parks and try to do a lot of coordination. And I'll come back and talk a little bit about the coordination, particularly at Rock Canyon, that happens. But I think it's important to understand that there are some other elements related to public works that may not be in those exact numbers from the Parks Department. Let me quickly touch on the specific topic that I was asked about in water conservation. There's a couple of different areas that I'll just briefly mention. Post ASR, so I think the council's probably hearing a little bit about some financial, how do I say this, good news, coming in, and we're trying to be a little careful and get some additional information so that we can lay out exactly what this potentially means for the city. But I think in when I'm asked about water conservation in the future, one of the things that's important is understanding what's happening after we start ASR on a permanent basis. And so one thing relative to water conservation that is obviously going to be important is for us to monitor the impact that is potentially happening in the aquifer, and that's going to take some study money after the project is started. And it's going to be an ongoing element. So that is a potential eligible item that I would put to the council. One of the questions, what happens without it? We're going to have to fund it through the water fund. It's going to be an element that's needed, and probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $500,000 each year, just for monitoring what's happening with the ASR program.
Sorry, can I just get clarification on that? You're saying after ASR is completed, you would need $250,000 to $500,000 a year to monitor, is it water use or the wells, or what are we monitoring exactly?
So The ASR projects that we've piloted so far, if you remember some of the photos that we've shown, we have monitoring wells that we're kind of following where that water is going. And that same type of thing would be happening after ASR, because ASR on a permanent basis is going to put a lot more water into the ground. And so we're going to see a bigger impact. We're going to see that move, into the city. And so seeing some of that happen is going to be part of the requirement from the state. Even the state's already told us, to plan on doing some follow-up monitoring. And it's not a significant project. I mean, I'm not trying to minimize the amount of money on that, but that certainly is an element that we're going to be asked to do with ASR.
Thanks. Did you have a question, Councilor Ellsworth?
Yeah, has that been programmed into the department's budget already?
We are anticipating ASR. We have an ASR account that's in it's a general ASR account. And so, yes, that's
for the monitoring.
Well, we haven't specifically said, it doesn't show up in, if you look at the CIP, the 5-year CIP for water, it doesn't specifically say ASR monitoring, post monitoring. There's a general ASR account near the bottom of the 5-year CIP, and we have money in that for every year for the next 5 years to show studies, elements of ASR that are going to be needed as a follow-up.
But that monitoring could be programmed into your traditional budget, not come out of these ARPA funds.
Yes. Okay. But the question is, without ARPA funds, what do we do? And the answer is we have to budget it out of water funding.
Okay. But that was never presented to us as part of that project cost, right? Yeah.
Some of the other questions that I've been asked, I know that there is some conversation about water conservation and different programs that could be considered. I think that there's a broader conversation that needs to happen about water conservation and the goals, and why Provo City, and particularly the public works staff, has a little bit different view than some other water agencies. And do we incentivize water conservation, and do we use funding, to do that? Right now, I think the city is on a very good track as far as water conservation. I have a report here. I apologize. I wrote on it already with some notes. But in July, we were 30 million gallons lower than last year, which was the second lowest year in the last 23 years. Only in 2011, which was a very, very wet water year, have we had a lower July water use. So we beat last year's record by 30 million gallons, which again, this year we're second lowest ever in the last 23 years in water use. So the residents are responding to requests for water conservation, and they're doing a fantastic job. I think there's a little bit more conversation. I don't want to turn this into a water conservation conversation, but I think there's a little bit more that needs to be discussed about that. The only other thing that I wanted to cover, there was a question about Slate Canyon and coordination with the parks project in Slate Canyon. And I think it's important. I wish Doug Robbins was still here. I think it's important to know that both staff and consultants with ASR projects have met with park staff and their consultant on the Rock Canyon project. We've talked about the details of the project and how it corresponds potentially with funding. It's still a little bit up in the air. It seems right now that ASR is going to be ahead of any trail improvements or parking lot improvements that happen in Rock Canyon. And so it seems to me, at least at this point, that we'll have the project pretty well finished, the public works end of the project, so parks can come in and do what they need to, and they'll have an element in Rock Canyon that will be a very nice element. I think the council understands that we'll have probably two main streams of water coming in the Rock Canyon area that will be able to be utilized, be able to have trails, some footbridges, things like that going over these different elements. And so the addition of water running in at the mouth of the canyon is going to be a nice element for the park use.
Is that water going to be running through the current creek bed, or is there an additional? Because you got that pipe coming sort of crosswise through the mouth. Is that going to be a little creek?
Yeah, so we've done pilots on two different stream beds. So the natural stream bed that's toward the north side of Rock Canyon, we've done pilots in that, and that will have water running in it pretty much year round. And then we've also an old irrigation ditch. That's the one that you're talking about, where we've temporarily piped over to that old irrigation ditch. That will actually start closer to the mouth of the canyon. So that ditch is actually existing further up. And the only limitation that we had with the pilot was we couldn't get the water any higher with our water system. And so we started the pilot where you see that pipe cutting through there. But in the permanent project, that second channel will actually be able to start higher near the mouth of the actual canyon and run a longer distance. And that will be able to meander. They'll be able to put ponds in it. They'll have a pretty wide variety of options to be able to use that water as an amenity in the Rock Canyon
So
area.
that was kind of what I was thinking about, is that that portion wasn't planned for. Obviously, we didn't know that was on the horizon. So there is no plan for water coming through that part of the mouth of the canyon. But if there is, then it would be nice to incorporate that into the plan.
Right. And we've actually talked with the consultant and some of the Rock Canyon Alliance people are aware of that option also. And I think most of the people that understand, you have to understand, we're kind of doing this as a pilot to see if it was going to be effective. And so there was a little question initially of whether this was going to be the plan, but the pilot has shown that is an effective use. It's a second stream that can be done, and it generates that much more water into the aquifer. So, and I think there was also a question about the roundabout near that location, and parks obviously have not funded for that. And so estimates for roundabouts of that size are, I was going to say 750, but with construction going the way it is, $1 million's probably
And
a
that
safer
is
bet.
that in your current CIP or no?
So we have roundabouts, a variety of roundabouts that come up in CIP projects, and so we could shift money there. If this money went for parks improvements, we could shift some money there, but we don't specifically say this is a roundabout at this location. We generally just do roundabouts in a more broad sense in CIP projects. And then we tell the council at the budget time, this is for this location, and our intent is to build it at this location.
Well, that's helpful. That's what I just want to, and I know I'm, I don't want to be overstepping up my bounds or our bounds as a council, telling, different departments and administration how to coordinate with each other. But in terms of funding, if there ends up being a funding question that pertains to the two departments working in the same area, we want to be aware of what that is, and we'd like to have the confidence, if we're funding something, that we know that this is aligned in a way that will accomplish all the goals that need to be accomplished.
Yeah, let there be no doubt. When with parks, we have a monthly coordination meeting with parks, and we talk specifically about regional sports parks, Slate Canyon, about Rock Canyon. We have quite an extensive coordination so that we're doing exactly what you're talking about. When funding comes available, if they're getting grants or other things, they tell us, hey, this is going to accelerate this project, and we need to figure out the other elements of, whether it's streets or water or sewer or whatever it is. We're going to work really hard to make sure that those elements come all together. And that's specifically why I mentioned the regional sports park early. The sports park is a much tougher issue for us to figure out where the roadway money comes from, because we're talking $4 to $5 million for roadways in that park. And it's not a simple roundabout. It's not, that's a lot of roadway that we have to figure out how to come up with some funding on.
Is it all right?
Yep.
To that point, I just wanted to emphasize on that because we have talked about that. The original feedback was that, and maybe you guys are still discussing, but with the regional park funding, the reason why I want to emphasize that one in particular is that with that 4 to 5 million to be able to finish up those roadway projects, if the 5.5 that they need to finish up the actual park is funded and we don't get funding to associated with that, with this ARPA funding to finish up the roadways, it makes it much harder for me to figure out, and then we have a time frame associated with it. It makes it harder for me to figure out ways that we can use engineering funds to, be part of this 20% match on grant funding that's coming out from the transportation bill. If that full 4 or 5 million goes over there, then I'm going to be coming back to you to to fund it somehow separately from the engineering fund to do those 20% matches for any grant funding we go after. So just want to emphasize that.
Mr. Shipley, wait, let me just point out, we have about 25 minutes, so we still have a couple more items. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So could just to confirm on water conservation itself as a general theme, I mean, the city's doing a great job in recent history and making some good progress, but your opinion is that there isn't anything material that we could do as far as projects or programming with ARPA funds specifically that would move the needle for conservation at this point?
I think the needle that we're going to move, the greatest impact in water conservation is the ASR project that we're already talking about. At a minimum, I'm going to try to put some numbers to this and help the council kind of understand a little bit. I was looking at the numbers that I mentioned today. If we were to save, I'm going to put this into acre feet instead of millions of gallons because it makes a little bit more sense. I apologize. I know that's a conversion that maybe doesn't work as easily, but annually the city uses about 28,000 acre feet of water. And during the summertime, if we were to save in the 3 months, June, July, and August, if we were to save between, let's say 10% of the water, it's about 2,000 acre feet that residents and users could potentially save the city. ASR, in comparison, the minimum, if we build a 10 MGD treatment plant, we're going to be putting 10,000 acre feet of water into the ground, 5 times more effective. And it's not only the amount, but it's also where it's going. The fact that it's in the ground and the city has wells that can, take that water out and use it again and put it in the ground and use it again. The source is important to consider when you talk about conservation. And that's the emphasis. And, some of the things that I hear from state leaders and from, other countries where they are emphasizing it's not just about the end user and asking conservation to happen. It really has to fall on the water agencies themselves. What are they doing to better use, to better plan, to better manage water? And that's exactly why my emphasis, and I think Public Works in general, the emphasis that we've put on ASR is it's about the project and what we can do as a water agency and not just leaning on individual end users to make the difference up and expect end users to do everything. And I think it's got to be a combination of the end users and water agencies really doing a top-notch job.
Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I think that there's some value in this project for the aquifer. I just am, the way that I've always seen it is that this is about increasing supply, not necessarily reducing demand. And water conservation in general is about reducing demand for the end user generally, right? So I would be interested if our council staff could come up with a tentative budget for what it would cost for educating citizens on water conservation, for finding strategic areas to remove grass, and to have also incorporate in that budget what some technology solutions would be for metering and monitoring water across the city or for citizens, so that people can understand when they have a leak and things like that. Every other city in the Wasatch Front is doing more than Provo on water conservation from an end user perspective. And so they're bending over backwards to reduce demand and to sacrifice and to be team players. And it's just been really embarrassing for me to hear that Provo's not being a team player when it comes to end user demand. And so I think that there's probably a balancing conversation to have where we're not just focusing on water supplies and demand and production. We're also talking about all out conservation in the desert.
Yeah, and I understand. I understand your viewpoint, and I was trying to allude earlier. I don't want to necessarily turn this into a water conservation conversation right now. I think to have the right people in the room and have the different viewpoints, I think it's important. And I understand the viewpoint of, reducing demand, but water conservation isn't, again, if you look at outside the state, water conservation can also be in forms of reuse. How many times do you use that same water over and over? And that's water conservation. That's good water management. And so I think there's a little bit, some differences of opinion that need to be discussed in front of the council.
Yeah, maybe we'll move on because we've got other things to do, and this may not be as directly relevant to ARPA. But in the Natural Resources Committee, we had some presentations recently from the Water Conservancy District and from a water professor at BYU who's been consulting with different cities and just looking at their recommendations for water conservation. They've been also telling us that grant opportunities are attached to a commitment to those water conservation methods. And we very much are overdue for a conversation with you and your staff to figure out, whether or not any of that cost has to cost money or whether it's something that we can implement. I am very sympathetic to a mutual supporting approach to this, because I heard you say, and I've heard you say it before too, that the end user and the management need to go together. And I think that's kind of our interest, is just making sure that, the community understands what the end user responsibilities are and what, from a policy perspective, might be desirable. And we don't know yet where we stand as a council on it, but we want to have, it'll probably just be another work session where we have you come back, and the staff has been starting that process. As you know, we're sort of underemployed in our staff right now. So we're waiting on that a little bit, but our plan is to look at what our code says, how does it compare with their recommendations? And then we want to hear from you and your staff about what you think would be useful, what you might not find useful, and go from there and see what we can determine. So
would be happy to participate.
Okay. We really appreciate all your work, and again we appreciate you and your staff's incentives on looking for money.
Thank you very much.
It's a great asset for us. Okay, we have a couple more items from Development Services and from Administration. So why don't we go to Development Services? We have 3 items: CDBG, nonprofits, Gateways, Trails and Rivers Plan, and Affordable Housing and Ownership, home ownership assistance programs. We have heard a little bit about some of those already, the CDBG presentation, and we did get an email from Brandon about the river trails and gateway plans and funding for that. But why don't we start with the CDBG nonprofits discussion? Is that just going back to Melissa? Okay.
Okay, thanks. Because we've already had a couple of allotments of CARES Act funding specifically for CDBG projects, and we still have some funding that we need to spend down there. I did speak with Heather Hogue at the Continuum of Care to ask about housing needs, because I've been so kind of more removed from that community for the last couple of years. I'm not as aware as I could be of what the needs are, but she did indicate that there are housing needs specifically for homelessness. As people are coming out of homelessness, the first 30 to 60 days of supportive housing that's needed. There really is not a lot to address that in our community right now. And she also mentioned that for victims of domestic violence, there is a lot more housing needed for that community as well. There's kind of a backlog of people waiting to get housed there. I'm not sure what kind of funding, I'm not sure what that entails. One other thing is we also have CARES Act funding for home, which addresses housing needs. The CARES Act funding is supposed to address specifically chronic homelessness, near homelessness, the possibility of homelessness and domestic violence. So pretty much the critical housing needs. So we've got 5 million that we still need to plan for and spend in that realm. And I know that Mr. Vernon is here and maybe he could speak to you on some of the housing projects that he has going on to address some of those issues, but that's all I have for CDBG and home.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Melissa? Go ahead, Councilor Whipple.
So I just want to be clear that I understand you already have CARES funds and everything that you've not yet spent.
Yes.
So it wouldn't necessarily be useful for us to put ARPA funds into CBDG right now?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Why don't we turn then to Gateway Trails and Rivers?
Got a quick slide or two here to show you. So we are, well, first of all, let me show you a little bit of where we're at. So in 2021, this body here appropriated $300,000 legacy CIP funds for the 3 plans up there, the Hillside and Canyons, River, Lake Shore, and Gateway plans. And we have been working with Design Workshop on the Hillside and Canyon and the River and Lakes plan. We are having a strategic kickoff meeting next week with 2 strategic kickoff meetings to get the Hillside and River plans underway. We've entered into a contract with Design Workshop for those 2 plans. Total there is $177,000. That leaves us $123,000 left for the Gateway plan. Considering that, we feel like we've got sufficient funds for these 3 plans. Implementation of these 3 plans, premature to kind of speculate what those implementation costs would be. We do anticipate some signage to go along with the Gateways plan, and we've worked a little bit preliminarily on that. But as far as implementation, I think we're a little premature. If you can go to the next slide or 2, I'll show you. Here's kind of a timeline for the 2 plans. We again are having a kickoff meeting this next week, and we'll be hoping to wrap this up in the next 9 to 12 months. We anticipate doing another survey, a statistically valid survey for these 3 plans. Really helpful with the general plan, and so that's kind of something we're shooting for to do really quickly, actually. So I think that could push us back maybe into June or July, perhaps, but I think it'd be worth it to get that kind of data. So just kind of a quick update on where we're at. And with that, I don't see an immediate need for additional ARPA funds for these plans.
Okay, I don't see any questions. I feel like I've got a lot of questions today. I apologize. And maybe this is for anyone who can remember, because I had this, when we were doing, I'm looking at Wayne because he's the steel trap in the room. When we were doing the CIP legacy funds, we had about 0.9 million, the council did, And so 300,000 was allocated for this. For some reason in my head, because I had the 900,000 and I had the 3 projects, I had it in my head that we had approved 3 projects at 300,000 each, which now obviously doesn't make any sense. That would have been much too expensive. So what happened to the other 0.6 million? Did we appropriate that? Or is that still in the legacy fund?
Yeah. I'll have to double check. I think there's about 400,000 remaining in the legacy CIP fund today. So there's a couple $100,000 appropriation. I am not remembering it off the top of my head.
Okay.
We'll be glad to look and get back to you on that.
And I'm wondering also about the grocery store money that was allocated. It was about $1 million, and we had said,
Right.
well, if we don't use that $1 million, it would. So do we have any clear idea if there's any left over?
Not entirely yet. We haven't spent any yet of that, but as you know, we're in very active discussions and trying to figure out exactly what our obligations might be on West Side or East Side grocery store. And so we're continuing to work those. We'll let you know as soon as we get a flavor of that. We probably won't need all of it, but we'll need a good share of it.
I'm interested in a little crumb sweeping and
Yep.
see if we
Yep,
can't
absolutely.
cobble together some money to cover the gap at Rock Canyon, for example, or some of these other projects. If
Yep.
there's
We'll keep you posted.
several 100,000 sitting out there, we certainly don't want to let it sit.
Yep.
I think we used a bit of those legacy funds for the audiovisual in the other building.
Yeah, we did.
And
do
we
that.
might, I don't know, we don't know if that's complete, right? We may still need a little bit of money to complete the audiovisual for the council needs.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I guess that's all we need from you. Thanks, Brandon.
Hey, you bet. Thank you.
Thanks for getting that process started. Okay, so City Hall. Hello, Mr. Vernon. Good to have you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. You got a hard decision. There's a lot of good projects out there. As a citizen, I love the parks and canyons, so I appreciate that. So did you get my what? This afternoon?
Yeah, I saw it on my email, but yeah, I think it came in
Okay.
the afternoon.
I apologize for that.
While they're doing that, I just wanted to tell you, I need to talk to you later about the project at Fifth West and Third South.
That's what this is.
That's what this is? Oh, good, because I have a lot to talk to you about on that.
Okay. Thanks. So I'll just go ahead and start while they're bringing that up. We purchased the old Fackler Tire property over a year ago, and some of our other funding that we were expecting to pull into this has been delayed because we're tied up a little bit longer than we thought we were on the 85 North project. And so this has gone a little bit slower than expected. But we're, the mission in the Community Land Trust is workforce housing. And we have a huge gap in Utah County and Provo as well. And so that's what we're focused on. This project, if you want to go to the next slide, we have named it so far Waterfall Landing, and it is on that site at 300 South, 500 West. This will be a mixed income development, possibly mixed use. We're looking at maybe a corner bakery, cafe, whatever, on the bottom floor there as well. We're looking at 200 plus condominiums, and it will be first time home ownership. Not required first time, but predominantly this price range would be home ownership for the first time. We would be removing a blighted property We'd be developing a flagship property on a very important corner in Provo. Hopefully a gorgeous building there that when you make that turn on State Street, it would be a pleasure to drive by. So homeownership, this will, increase property values. It will improve neighborhood stability, school stability, reduce crime. You just build better neighborhoods with the more home ownership you get in an area. And again, I think this will be young families that we're keeping in Provo. Out of the 200 plus units, we're looking at doing 20% or 40 units that would be affordable, that would be put into the land trust. And these would be available to buyers that earn 60% or below a very median income. And as you can see, that's for a family of four, that's $56,160. So fairly low income range. And this would be have land use restrictions and HOA restrictions that would ensure long-term home ownership. So we don't want this to turn into a rental project later on. So there would be some pretty strong restrictions involved in that. So development details, the estimated cost, we're looking at 80 million, maybe as high as 85 million. Our land costs for the total project, we're looking at 4.5 million. It would be a 4/2 podium construction. You've got a bedroom mix there. And again, these are early figures that we're working through. Everything changes as costs change, and that's the biggest driver on this. So we'd be looking at 160 market rate condos. You're looking in the probably 350 to 400,000 range for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. That's comparable to what's going on in Vineyard right now with similar projects. The 40 workforce housing units would be sold at 180 to 200,000 because that's what that income level can afford. And so that gap of the construction costs will be 100 to 140,000 per unit. And so that's the gap we're trying to make up. And so we've got on 40 units, we've got a $4 million to $5 million gap. And part of that will be made up by a $10,000 to $15,000 fee that will be on every one of the units that are market rate. So they'll be subsidizing part of what we are, but we are still going to have a fairly significant gap. So we're looking for $2 million for this project, and that will move us forward very quickly to a point where we think we can get this entitled and get it built in 30 months. If we don't get funding here fairly quickly, I'll probably be recommending to the board in 6 months that we sell the property and shift money to other projects we're working on. It's zone general commercial, and so we'll probably just sell it, for whoever wants to come in. It may come in as a market rate multifamily, but that'll be rental. You won't find anybody else that's going to do home ownership. So again, a lot of the money that's been talked about, the ARPA money, that's all homeless. It's all generated for housing, for homeless services and housing the homeless, and it would not apply to this. So CDBG or the other projects would not, money would not be available for this. And so I just think it's a timely project. This neighborhood really needs something like this to help with the home ownership in the area.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilor Whipple?
Yeah, so my understanding on this project is that as you've been working on it, the number of units that you need to put on it have increased from 200 to now it looks like 400 units.
No, we're probably 240 max, 200 to 240.
So, so it's 200 for the condos. I was counting the 2-bedroom and then the market rate is two separate numbers and adding them together.
Oh, no.
Okay, good. Whew. Okay.
We were hoping to keep below 200, but the costs just keep going up. I mean, you know, you're at a little over 30,000 per stall right now for structured parking above ground. And so if you're doing 2 stalls, you know, per 2-bedroom unit, plus land costs and everything, before I even start building units, I've got 100,000 into each unit. So yeah, the costs have escalated. And when that happens, then you need more units to offset that.
So you already have the old tire property.
Yes.
Do you not have the used car lot yet? Or
the corner property, we're in negotiations on that.
Okay. And I understand that the look of the project has changed. So it's getting taller.
Yes.
Now that's a concern for the neighborhood just because you're building something massive next to single-story, single-family homes.
Right.
So are you looking at being able to kind of step it in a little bit or to make it feel better?
Possibly. It depends on, I mean, if that's something the city wants, then we're pushing units. We're pushing to a 5th floor in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So you're 5/7 instead of, or 5/2 instead of 4/2. So, I mean, it's pretty wide open right now. I think we've got some leeway in what we can do when we come to the city to design that. But we're very aware. We've talked to most of the neighbors in there and told them exactly, you know, what they would be facing, you know, as we build this. And first 2 floors are going to be concrete because it's going to be parking.
So the 2 million that you're asking for is so that you can wrap up property acquisition and know that you'll be able to cover your initial costs so that you can build these units and we can have some affordable ones?
Yeah, it starts the acquisition. I've got another property under contract that we just don't have the money. I've got a 6-month closing date on that. And so this would just accelerate what we're doing. And, you know, we would start entitlement hopefully within 60, 90 days.
So if you don't get money from us with this, how do you get money normally?
The only way to push this project forward would be for the affordable units to drop to 5 or 10 and the market rate to increase substantially. That's the only way I can see pushing this forward. If we're only getting 5 or 10 units, I don't know that it's worth our time to go through this whole process. This is a huge project. It'll be the largest one we've done. And given what we're dealing with on 85 North, cost increases, the time delays because of supply chain issues, you know, it's difficult to develop right now. And so, you know, we really need to be able to get a fair number of affordable units to be able to move this forward.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman McKay.
I'm passionate about this project. I remember listening to the neighborhood meeting when this was discussed while I was campaigning. But I just love that we're providing homeownership. I think you're absolutely correct. Everything going in is rentals. If someone else buys that property, there's no way it'll be homeownership. I love that we're protecting the homeownership with the HOA, and it'll help those schools, that neighborhood so much. And it's the only way, by doing a smaller square footage and condominiums and that for sale or smaller homes for sale are the only way I think we're going to allow so many people to ever get into homeownership. We have to go smaller. And I just love that there's this. I love the land trust. I love that you're working on it and we're bringing it to Provo. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Robert. We appreciate you very much and all that your organization does for our community. This is a really valuable project, and I hope there's some way we can find a way to help.
Okay, appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Okay, we're over time. I apologize, Mr. Parker. It's not that this is a sticky issue or anything, right?
No, not at all.
Parking.
No, and I will be endeavor to be a lot faster than I normally am. No one's ever accused me of being short-winded. So first of all, just to give just a brief context, as you'll recall, the redevelopment of the City Hall, the old City Center block, was intended to try to address both demolition and parking through the redevelopment RFP. When we put out the request for proposals and entertained proposals, we included a requirement that the new developer cover the cost of demolition and providing parking for City Hall. As you know from our process, what we discovered is that current economic conditions made that impossible. And our expectations were probably unusually high. And of course, that was also fed by developers who said, absolutely, we can figure this out. And so now we find ourselves in the circumstance where we don't have a defined redevelopment plan yet, although we are moving forward. We're going through what I would call a discovery process. We've met with a number of developers from very large scale to very small scale to local to national to better understand sort of market realities. We've looked at questions like density, cost, return on investment, what expenses might be covered by redevelopment, which ones would need to be covered by some city or redevelopment agency subsidy. Based on our early experience, we think we need to cover some of the costs of parking and or demolition. And consequently, we included in the administration's request for your consideration for ARPA funding, a $3 million earmark to address parking needs at City Hall. That could have been $2 million in demolition and $1 million in parking. The nomenclature is less important than having the pot of money available to us. One of the other things that we've been thinking about in this process is the need for us to think about the future of the Covey Center. We don't know necessarily what the future is going to bring. Will there be a desire to maybe do more in terms of either an outside venue, or maybe there's a theater element or some other aspect of the Covey Center? So we are trying to look, as we prepare an RFP moving forward, to look at some flexibility in terms of what we might do or not do immediately around the Covey Center. So it is our intent to get a request for proposals out very shortly, and I'll cover that in just a second. As we've looked at the potential that we might not find a viable redevelopment plan in the short run, again, as you heard Mr. Vernon suggest, development is getting a lot more difficult and hard to predict. So we have actually thought about what we've called Plan Z, which means it's not Plan A or Plan B, and it's pretty far down the priority list. But that we would essentially just retain and landscape a strip of land in the short run along Center Street and Third West, and essentially for future development, sale, development, partnered development, and then surface park on the interior of the block, which would, again, meet immediate needs, probably not a great long-term solution, but also keep some options open for later. And so that $3 million number was kind of pegged at what it would take for us to develop surface parking on the block to accommodate the needs of City Hall. Or it could be a subsidy for stacked parking in a redevelopment project. So in terms of parking, until we demolish the former City Center building, we can park City Hall, and we're doing it today. We can park it on the existing surface lot that's immediately south of the old City Center building. The new parking, which we added as a part of the new City Hall project, and the parking under the existing city center building. The combination of those provide adequate parking for our employees. When we get into trouble is when we overlap with an event at the Covey Center, but that's always been the case with parking between the two entities. And so again, we think we have a short-term solution that will buy us some time as we go through the process, but we do believe we're going to likely have to deliver to a developer a clean site, which means we'll have to come up with a way to pay for the asbestos abatement and demolition and have some money to put into a future parking solution. So without the ARPA appropriation, to answer your question, we would likely be back to you for either a general fund appropriation for demolition and or surface parking, or we would have to come up with a development plan, which would likely be more dense than maybe we would like in order to monetize our ground and therefore use some of that monetized property sale or lease for providing costs for parking. So that's kind of basically where we are. We're hoping to maintain the $3 million appropriation as requested and allow us then to continue to work on finding the optimal parking and / redevelopment solution for the block. So that's hopefully answered your questions, gives you a current status report.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Parker? Councilor Whipple? And again, we're over time, so just keep that in mind.
Quick.
Okay, so this sounds a little bit slushy to me.
It is.
So either we would spend the money ourselves to tear this building down and pave the spot, or we would get a deal quicker than we expect, but not as quick as we'd hope with the developer, and then the $3 million would go towards a parking structure as part of their development.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure I understood it.
Yeah, and again, it's early in the game. We also recognize that we do have some timing constraints with ARPA money. We have to have whatever we're doing under contract by the end of next year or end of 24, and then all of the money spent by the end of 26. And so we do have a little bit of time to let this project develop a little further. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have a request for a closed session. Mr. Jones, do you want to explain what the reason for that is?
Yes, there's a couple of topics, and those topics fall within reasonably imminent litigation and or character and competence of individuals. Those are both approved reasons under the statute for closed meetings, and so it'd be appropriate for a motion to close at this time.
Okay, I'll look for a motion to close the meeting. And okay, Councilor Ellsworth motioned. Do I have a second?
Yep.
Councilor Whipple said, yep. I take that as a second. I need to have a roll call, so I will vote yes. Councilor Whipple?
Yes.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Yes.
Councilor Shipley?
Yes.
Councilor McKay?
Yes.
Councilor Fillmore?
Yes.
And Councilor Hoban? Councilor Hoban?
Yes.
Okay, vote is unanimous. We will now close the meeting and move upstairs. Thanks.
Record.